Hey man, are you looking for a place to get away from it all? A place to hide from the worries of the world, the struggles of your day to day, or a psychopathic police officer hell-bent on taking away everything that matters to you, ultimately harshing
Your mellow?
At Refuge Harbor Homes, we offer affordable, middling quality houses for former hippies, freaks, long hairs, bohemians, free spirits, and flower children. Located on the mouth of Seventh River, our community is built on love, harmony, and the most beautiful land around. A stone's throw away from Eureka and Crescent City, we have a thriving population of friends who love to take part in groovy activities like gardening, watching TV, home repair, watching TV, weekly swap meets, and so much more. Far out. Now dig on this. We know that the burdens of life can get so heavy, so we've taken every step possible to keep all those bad vibes out of sight. Man. That's why we also offer separate, distant amenities for those rascally thanatoids to keep them occupied and away from the general population. They won't scare you with their existential dread and desolation stemming from the unfathomable horror our government subjected them to. That's not your bag. Refuge Harbor Homes. Get away from the man and get yourself some land. A wholly owned subsidiary of Ralph Lauren Enterprises itself, a wholly owned subsidiary. Hello, and thank you for joining us in Mapping the Zone, a podcast dedicated to highly fixated reviews of large, dense books, specifically the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. My name is Kate, and I'm one of the co-hosts.
My name is Cody.
Luke.
And I'm Will.
And today we're going to be discussing Chapter 14 of Vineland. We are officially in the second to last chapter here, the penultimate chapter of Vineland before we'll finish up our third book that we are covering so far for this show. And that being said, I just want to, as always, start with you, Will. Do you have a summary for us?
I actually do, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, a year after Fernezzi's leaving, Hector and what seems to be a literal ton of weed appeared in Zoid's home one day, instantly making the connection to Vond. Zoid confronts Hector about this attempted baby snatching, who is indignant at the accusation. He blows his whistle and the troops outside rush in to apprehend the criminals. As Zoid is briefly considering the option of turning snitch for a call to Sasha before being hauled away, the unbeckonable grandmother herself arrives to berate her still son-in-law for whatever fool thing he got himself into to warrant this number of law enforcement officers. He fills her in on his deductions, though not before slinging his own insults. They apologize, and she takes Prairie. Zoid then spends a day and a night in the jail, and is awakened by none other than Brock himself, afforded the prosecutor's precious time in order to simply lay the facts of the matter out, as Fernezzi's legal representative. Chiefly, that they are not looking to assume custody in the least. Wheeler is to keep Prairie as far away from them as possible, and to harbor no childish intentions of reuniting with her mother. He explains his way of seeing their arrangement before instructing a subordinate to punch Zoid. Another night cell-bound until Hector arrives, offering freedom in exchange for information. Zoid blows up at him before being tricked into providing some information, and then damning him to a life as a turncoat. He arrives at Sasha's place and tells her everything that happened, except that Vond had forced him to watch Fernezzi be escorted from jail into Brock's own car. Zoid and Sasha discuss options, ruling out the Lamb. They settle on Vineland as a haven, obscurity by typicality. On their way up, Zoid stops to visit an old friend, Mucho Mas, and we and he learn what old Wendell's been up to since the mid-60s in Lot 49. Now completely straight, he and Zoid still reminisce a bit, on their hopes for immortality. We watch as Zoid settles into his new life as a single dad in a long montage. One day, as a sick Prairie asks how long she'll feel so ill, he realizes how much she matters to him, and that he'd done right bringing them to Vineland.
All right. Thank you, Will. Who wants to get into their overall thoughts on this chapter first?
I'll just say that within the first sentence of this book, I almost audibly said "fuck you" to Brock. I hate him so much.
He's really the worst person alive.
Yeah. No, overall, I it's a good chapter. It's not my favorite. It's got some really good parts in it. And it's obviously important for setting up the final chapter that's coming. But it's I'm not gonna say it's my least favorite chapter. I don't really know which one I would say that about, but it's far from my favorite. I felt it is, I don't want to say serviceable, but it was good, just not, it didn't really, nothing really stupendous stood out to me overall.
Yeah, what about you, Will?
I'm sorry, I'm just I'm seething with rage. No, I do disagree though. I find this chapter incredibly satisfying. And it's interesting because this is not the kind of chapter that I come to Pynchon for, but I really do love it. Because it's kind of like a perfect denouement of the story. Like it really does bring everything back together, and it's structurally very simple. It's just filling us in on the time between Frenzy leaving and the beginning of the book from Zoid's perspective. Really a very quick rundown of that, 12 years, 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's I find it just about perfectly done though. I think it really is just a kind of a summation of everything that has happened so far in a way that does drive home the character of Zoid in a very illuminating way, I think. And I find it really tranquil, almost. Tranquil, sorry.
Yeah, Luke, what about you?
Yeah, I like this chapter. I've been thinking this week about how it was kind of nice to return to Zoid, and how whenever we're with Zoid in this book, things are a bit more lighthearted, and it kind of seems like with Zoid, like no matter what he goes through, he always kind of like the dude from The Big Lebowski, he always abides.
Yeah.
Um, and there's some really cool parts of this chapter. I like the depiction of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
We do get a little bit more about Vineland and what it looks like and what it's like, which I enjoy. Um, and yeah, I mean it's a lower stakes chapter. We're still we're setting up for the ending, where all the characters kind of, I guess I don't want to spoil anything, but um, yeah, we're setting up for the ending, going, Zoid and I mean there's I guess a lot of this is backstory, but yeah, we're still setting up for the ending, which is nice. Yeah, I like I like this chapter.
Yeah, I think it's a good chapter. I think it's interesting to have a chapter that does seemingly feel very low stakes, because everything basically since Zoid passed the business card to Prairie has just been kind of on a continuous steady ramp up with how serious it all is.
Yeah. That
And
was kind of where the pedal hit the metal for.
Yeah. That car takes off, and then just suddenly so does the narrative. So it's interesting to really get this moment of slowdown after all of that. Like it is, we've talked about it a lot, especially in Mason and Dixon, of these chapters where Pynchon kind of gives the reader a break, either from the heavyweight assault of thematic writing, or just length, or depravity, or whatever it might be. And this one, I think, is where he gives you a moment to recover from the history lesson you've just received over 200 pages almost, and then before he brings you into the sort of end game, so to speak. And I agree. I like seeing more of Vineland. I think it's a cool place. I think Will basically hit the nail on the head when he said those people that you're looking for all migrated north to, I think your example was the PNW. that's where they all are. Like, that description of Vineland reminded me a lot of when Will made that joke in an earlier episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Brock does, like, super suck. I hate him so much. One of the worst villains in recent history for stuff I've read. And so you get kind of that final resolution, that final nail in the coffin if you needed any further convincing that he's terrible. And then, yeah, you just kind of get this nice slowdown that includes a father who was at one time absent coming to be fond of his own child and, like, stepping more solidly into the role that a father is supposed to have, which sort of really gives you that extra context for their relationship at the beginning of the book.
I do like Zoid's kind of redemption in this chapter, especially coming from last chapter where we had, we see him kind of fuck off after Prairie was born, and we knew at the beginning of the book that he was there for her, but they still had a sort of semi-contentious back and forth every now and then. But I think this chapter does a really good job of really showing how dedicated to being a father he became. Like, absolutely, he wasn't there in the beginning, and that's a terrible thing, but he definitely stepped up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that moment where he sort of looks in his daughter's eyes as she's ill, like, I can imagine that could be one of those moments pulled from reality of either Pynchon having a moment like that or some other parent that he talks to. Like, that just feels very immediate and relevant to what your mindset changes into when you have your own children.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, Will.
I was just going to say, I do think that in terms of character development for Zoid in particular, this chapter, for some reason, what it brings to mind is this kind of a mental image of, sorry for all of the topological haters out there. It brings to mind like a bow tie. If anybody has ever, been a child looking at bow ties and just thinking, well, that's how I want to tie my shoes or whatever. You kind of just think, well, this doesn't make sense. You look at a bow tie and you look at the flatness and you look at how the one side is different from the other side of the actual fabric itself, and it just doesn't make any sense. And in this case, you're looking at Zoid and thinking, okay, why is this guy still doing all of this stuff, and why is he still the way he is? And you do grow to really resent him in the middle parts of this book. While there is some sympathy, he's kind of really awful to be around, it seems. And then, this chapter is kind of like when someone finally shows you how a bow tie works, and you see the little flip, you see the way that you twist the ribbon around itself, and it makes sense, and it's just right in that way.
That's a really good analogy.
Yeah, that is a very, very good analogy. I agree with you too, Will, that I think the way that this is structured, and where it fits in the overall novel and how it sets everything up for the closing out portion is very impressive. It's a book that the first time I read it, I don't think I appreciated the construction of how Pynchon put it together quite as much as I have this time through, with just the constant time skipping, the constant narrative change from that long film session to the 60s and 70s to where we're at now. It is very impressive. This chapter is a good illustration of that. So that being said, we open up this chapter with Brock being like, wow, just so gross. Just the fact that his response to Prairie existing, the fact that she had a child was, so you've reproduced. Like,
oh god,
it's like he wakes up in the morning and just says to himself, how can I be the scuzziest human being in all of my interactions today? So that made my skin crawl immediately as we push forward. But the main thing is that he's now setting up Zoid to be put in a position where Brock can easily get in touch with him, I guess is a way to put it. And he plants a very comically oversized brick of weed in his house. Yeah. Which the description of that thing every time Pynchon returns to just how large it is, he changes the way that he describes it, or like the shape that it's compared to, and it gets ever more like absurd as it goes on. But I just love the simple inclusion of like, it's so big that it would have been physically impossible to get through my doorway. Like, almost as if they took the front of the house out and then brought it in and then put it back.
Yeah, I do. I did like the kind of return to some of the humor that's in this chapter for sure.
Yeah,
and to start, especially it's needed after everything we've gone through, and then especially after starting the chapter the way it started. So yeah, it's very much appreciated. Nod to 2001: Space Odyssey.
Yeah, and I just love the very plain, matter of fact way that him and Hector are discussing it. Of Hector being like, "Oh, yeah, this is totally like, I know that this isn't legit. Like, no one would assume that this is legit. Like, I know exactly what's going on here, and so does Zoid. But they're still gonna like play this out because they they have to. That's another aspect of the humor in this scene that I loved. What did we think about this scene, and do we have any additional thoughts on it?
I really do love the way that it's just mentioned in two places, the favors, returning favors and doing a favor for somebody. It feels very much like it, with that you suddenly get the understanding that Hector is beholden to people, and not just in the, oh, he has a boss kind of way, but he has personal debts that he can't default on in the same way that Zoid will soon have.
That's a really good call out. That's easily missed too.
I do also like how, again, going back to the theme of television that has run through this, this has a very police procedural like, comedy vibe to it. Like the way it's written very much plugs into that kind of TV show.
In fact, as I was reading it, I was reminded of a scene in The Long Goodbye, the Elliot Gould, Philip Marlowe movie, where he goes back to his apartment and these two cops are waiting for him, and they're trying to get some information out of Marlowe that he's refusing to give them. And so what one of them does is pushes like Marlowe into his partner, and then his partner like flops on the floor like he just broke his leg. And Marlowe's response is literally to just dryly go, "Oh, you guys are gonna really pull this old shit, are you?" Like, and that was the exact like vibe of this scene, I feel like, in the book. And you're right, it is something that has been used in a lot of police procedural moments. The really like corrupt cop or slightly corrupt cop inventing some reason to arrest somebody is very much a trope.
I also think there's a sitcom aspect to this scene too.
Oh, for sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Like him kicking back on his heels.
Yeah, I think Hector just has watched so much television that he carries an aura of TV just everywhere he goes.
Yeah,
including his interactions with hippies, especially. So from there, Pynchon throws Zoid in jail as a result of this narrative arc that he set up for Brock and Zoid to come face to face. And I do love like the different subtle manipulations that you see in place here, from like who Zoid is forced to potentially be in a cell with. Like the entire way that Brock has set up this imprisonment is to put Zoid at like the biggest disadvantage possible. And it's interesting to see how Pynchon plays that out, because he as a character doesn't necessarily know what's about to happen to him, but we definitely do. And you just see Brock's fingerprints over the entire thing before he actually shows up. And before we get into their conversation, any thoughts on the jail that he's sent to or anything like that?
Well, not so much on the jail, but I do really appreciate the kind of the outlining of Zoid's pretty paltry, personal development throughout his adulthood so far. Basically learning to have emotions, and then realizing that sometimes you don't cry, and the time that this is reminded to us is in the form of him sitting in like a jail waiting room.
Yeah, it's true.
As though that's like even the most in touch with their feelings person would say, "Yeah, you should cry it out, man." In jail, in the middle of where the guards and everyone else can see you. That's where you should be crying publicly.
Yeah, that's gonna work out great for you on the inside.
Yeah, I did really like that short digression about men crying and how it was more
Hmm.
fashionable supposedly, but not necessarily mainstream, and how people responded. Um, it did kind of make me laugh, and just kind of it's a very hippie little tangent to go on.
Yeah, did you actually want to read that, Luke? That
Okay.
was one of the things that I had pulled as good stuff to go over.
Following the wisdom of the time, Zoid, bobbing around among the flotsam of his sunken marriage, had been giving in to the impulse to cry, any time it came on him, alone or in public, getting in touch with his feelings at top volume, regardless of how it affected onlookers, their own problems, their attitudes towards life, their lunch. After hearing enough remarks like, "No wonder she left you," "Blow your nose and act like a man," and "Cut your hair while you're at it," he'd come to think of crying as another form of pissing, just as likely at the wrong time and place to get him in trouble, and he learned after a while how to hold it all in till later, till he could safely be taken by the high salt wave, often while some door was still closing, some emergency brake just notched up tight. Then it says this time he really had to wait for the rest of the day, grim and clenched, till he'd been handcuffed. It goes on from there.
Yeah, just one of the many, again, excellent sections in this from the standpoint of the character development that it does give to Zoid. Yeah, that was one of my favorite sections of the chapter as well.
Yeah, and it even kind of symbolically connects back to the idea of the cyclical cultural or social movements, the way
Mhm.
that in many cases people who are progressives reinvent conservatism in this very visceral sense.
Yeah, yeah, very true.
I do think it's also worth going back a couple of steps before even Zoid ended up in jail. The scene where Sasha comes over and is essentially taking control of Prairie from there. There's a really beautifully written paragraph where she's talking to Zoid and Zoid's changing Prairie's diaper. And he's in doing all this, it's kind of hitting him that like he needs to really be savoring these moments because there's not going to be a lot of them left, especially if things go even further south than they might at that time. It's just a really kind of heartbreaking scene to like watch
Mhm.
him like understand what his fate is and having to give up his child and potentially forever. He doesn't know at that time specifically what's going to happen to him or how deep into trouble he is. So, he's really kind of having to reckon with that part of his unknown future.
Yeah, very true. And that obviously ties into the overall theme of Zoid, learning to accept, appreciate, and love the fact that he is a father. It really does start at that point. And it is fun to watch Pinchon write out baby dialogue.
Yeah, it is. And also the whole cloth diaper thing, like as we used cloth diapers for mostly for my daughter. We did have them for my son too. And like reading the process, like this is someone who knows what it is like to change a cloth diaper. So there's some experience on the page there.
He's been there. He knows.
Yep.
He knows what I've seen. So Brock shows up in a very dramatic, like I would even say like overly dramatic, filmy way to taunt somebody, where he steps outside of his cell and just goes Wheeler. Just again, just kind of like comically evil at times, but you just know that coming from him, it's like earnest and sinister in its earnestness, as opposed to just being ridiculous. And Will.
I just really love the description of like a Doberman at night. Whaler, something.
Just at every description of him and like then any sort of analogy given to Brock, I love, like, and that is one of them. Like he usually has pulled one out, like one in each chapter, the fascist like eagle statues on buildings one from the previous
Oh,
chapter
God,
is
yeah.
amazing. And then comparing him here to a Doberman, which obviously through the correct lens has a different sense of foreboding or evil to it. Like it's very interesting that he sort of always reminds you that this is a terrible human being in front of you in any way that he can.
Yeah.
And so we do learn that his plans are not as bad or as, potentially bad as they could be. He could be planning to take Prairie. Instead, he simply wants Zoid to disappear, basically. And as a continuation of the previous chapter where Frenesi was around Prairie long enough to start kind of coming into that same space that Zoe gets to, where she wants to be a mother and she wants to go into the life that means in an extended capacity, and then loses it because Brock shows up, and then Brock makes this request of Zoid, really again underpins the depravity of this character, almost as if he knows exactly what would happen if they weren't as far away from them as possible, and that he's actively keeping Frenesi from becoming like the woman that she thought she could be and would want to be, and just knows exactly how to do that, is just so creepy and gross, and again underpins just how evil this character is. But it's an incredibly effective scene to describe that evil.
Yeah.
Well, and the little side path where we get to see Zoid kind of assuming what he does about Brock as a character is a really interesting way to flesh him out. It's just very straightforward in the sense that, this guy's just a maniac. But the way he's a maniac, the way he's compared to the people who drag race on highways and stuff, it's I don't know. I think it's gripping.
Yeah, I agree. Like he is a villain that is somewhat compelling in the brutality that he engages in, just from a standpoint of wondering like why are you like this? Like what compels you to be this way?
Yeah.
And it's just it gets back to what you were saying a couple episodes ago, Cody, about his solipsistic nature. Like, yeah, he just cares about himself.
And that's the thing, is I think it can be really hard, I think, to write a villainous antagonist that doesn't really have a backstory. Like we never get a really clear picture of why Brock is the way he is. And I think that really serves the story better in this case. I think in some situations you kind of want to get it's important to know, where an antagonist is coming from so they can have their own arc within the story. I don't think that would have helped in this situation. I think the story here benefits from us not knowing why Brock is the way he is. I think this goes back to that whole concept of, there's some people are just evil and that's it. And it can be hard to grapple with that and understand that from a number of different perspectives, but that's just the case. There are just some people who are just like this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, especially looking at it from a standpoint of, we don't, like you're saying, we don't really know anything about his actual childhood or what made him the way that he is. We just know that he's like that. I think there's something chilling about the fact that he's just a prosecutor. Just that, like, this could be someone who, when they got into a role of pretty low-ranking government work, just that small bit of power was capable of corrupting him horribly to becoming the person that he is now. And I think that there is something in that we've also talked about a couple times through this book, where Pynchon is almost doing a federal government as cosmic horror idea of just there is this sort of evil that exists here that will corrupt people and drive them to do just heinous shit, even at the lowest levels of power where they don't even really have access to the real sort of rooms where these decisions are made.
Well, I think it's also telling that he's plugged into a system that doesn't really stop him. And I think that's also part of what we're getting at here, is that it's not just Brock the individual who is to blame for a lot of what's going on here. Like he's in he exists within a system that basically allows him to thrive. Like
Yeah.
the police department is clearly not doing anything to curb his behavior in any way, shape, or form. If anything, they're really encouraging it. And it's that I think that just adds another layer of horror to all of this, is that, you know, he is a fungus growing in the right environment.
Yeah, and I mean that really sells the importance of that scene between him and his boss when he runs away to Washington, where his boss is like,
Yep.
if you want a hippie woman, you know, to sleep with, to marry, what we can get you that. Like just that scene where, like you're getting at, Cody, a standpoint of he is encouraged and supported by that larger apparatus, right? To that degree that Pynchon puts directly in the text, you know, a couple chapters ago.
Yep.
And that, you know, what Brock is ultimately doing is being a force of the societal change of the Nixon-Reagan era that is killing all of that possibility or that hope or that dream of what may have come if the you know the leftist revolution occurred. Is really like, it's really telling. Like nothing happens to him because he's doing exactly what needs to happen for this next period of societal change to come along to actually be effective. Will be.
So I have to push back just a tiny bit on not the point that either of you are getting at, because I agree with the larger strokes of what both of you are saying, but I do think that we know, in as much as we can know why any character is doing anything, why Brock is the way he is. I think that that's kind of the point of the last chapter, is his that all it boils down to, the only thing that makes him the way he is that like fundamental disgust and intolerance for like a lack of control. It's just like, for him, whether it's you know, whether it's a conditioned thing or it's a sincere, you know, outgrowth of his genetics in some way, you know, he hates that lack of control. He hates that idea of like, not idea of anything, but just he hates the sensation that something is not being pared down.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I think what I'm getting at is that that's the force that motivates him, but it's never really made clear what got him to that point. Like what, you know, if there was an event in his life, or if there were circumstances, you know, things that happened to him along the way that caused that part of him to form, that basically instilled in him that need to control and that need to have control. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That is what's motivating him for sure.
Well, and the only reason I bring it up is that I think that colors the way that we should be thinking about, I guess, his tenure as that fungus growing in the right conditions. I think that shapes the structure of what that environment is.
I do think it's interesting that what Cody was talking about, especially with the control aspect. I want to say it's in this chapter that it's mentioned that Brock has nightmares about forced conception. Um, which, you know, another word for forced conception is rape, which kind of goes
That
back to
was
some of the stuff that.
last chapter.
Oh, it was? Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
It's
For some reason I thought it was
mentioned here too.
this chapter. But yeah, I mean, that goes back to, I mean, you know, like that, there's aspects of being sexually assaulted and sexually assaulting someone else that is about control over that person, or that person controlling you. So if he does have that kind of trauma in his past, that could, um, you know, make him a little bit more wanting to have, you know, if he was the victim of a sexual assault whenever he was younger, it could make him, you know, crave the power to have the control to not have that not happen again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Luke. I think that certainly underplays a good part of his psyche, especially when it comes to his relationships with women.
Yeah.
So Zoid does. I do love this this exchange in a lot of ways. Like the conversation itself is very interesting, and I also think it's interesting that not all of it seems to be rendered in the text, because there is a quote about how long they'd been smoking, but the only dialogue that we read is really not enough for that many cigarettes to have gone through both of them. So it is curious to wonder what else they might be discussing as that evening of smoking cigarettes goes on and on and on. But we also get the gross part where Brock tries to see what his skull shape is, so that he can do his esoteric skull shape racism.
Yeah.
And eventually he basically gives Zoid what the pitch is, and Zoid, knowing that he really just needs to do what he can to protect his daughter, agrees to it. But not before getting punched twice in what appears to be the most vicious 2 punches ever laid upon a person.
Don't mess with Ron.
No, not at all. He'll mess you up.
Yep.
I agree with you though, Cody, in your note here about the hard-boiled aspects of Pinchon. I think that there's a good chunk of that in this chapter as a whole. Do you want to read that quote that you inserted there?
I do, yeah. So, and this is the hard-boiled thing. I think comes through in a lot of his work, and it's especially in Against the Day, and there were elements of it in Inherent Vice, but it's kind of peppered throughout all of them. But yeah, it's part of my favorite. Like, you can really see where his admiration for writers like Hammett and Chandler, and even like James Cain and those guys, like, really shines through. And this particular paragraph is on page 300. They'd been smoking up a storm and could see each other only dimly through the nicotine weather, despite the strong light from overhead. Somewhere down the road from this federal facility, carried by the midnight wind from a biker's ball called Knucklehead Jack's, came live, loud rock and roll, ever-breaking waves of notes and squealing, screaming guitar solos that defied any number of rules, that also lifted the blood and reassured the soul of locked-up Zoid, who now had to reassess the nature of the threat and could still not believe Brock was telling him the terms of an actual deal. Were they plea bargaining? Did Brock really not want Prairie? Like, after reading that, the whole conversation between the two of them, I went back and I reread it, and it really has that kind of noirish, hard-boiled back and forth aspect to it that I really love, and it's so tight and well done, and I love writing like that.
Yeah, I agree. It's some of my favorite stuff that he engages in all of those books. And it is interesting that he has this belief going into that interaction that he's actually going to try and make a play to get Prairie.
Like, he's got no dog in that fight whatsoever.
No, yeah, I think that's so interesting that Zoid wouldn't even think that this guy could be that bad. That, like, maybe he's trying to get Prairie to still make Fernessi into a mother. I assume that's what Zoid is expecting, but no, he's not prepared for the fact that Brock's like, no, actually, I want the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It's quite a reveal there at the end in a way that is very sort of detective novel-y, where it just comes in the form of a question that the detective is asking themselves. And then, of course, after he gets pummeled, Hector shows back up to give him the terms of his release. Now that we've seen more of the two of them, do we have any thoughts on their relationship and why Hector chooses to do this for him in this chapter? It's very interesting to see this part of it wrap back around from the beginning.
So I really get the sense, just basically based on hope for a better world, even in this very dark fictional novel, that Hector, when he's saying, like, you know what, I gotta start thinking about lunch. Do you have to keep playing fuck with this? What are they? Get you the right judge? Dig it? Nice minimum joint? All of that. I get the sense, just the degree he is protesting, the degree he is, like, acting like, yeah, I'm gonna walk out of here and just leave you to rot in prison. I do get the sense that he does actually care. That he does actually, but between that and the earlier scene where he's like, I would not kidnap your baby. That's not why I'm here.
Yeah.
I do think that it shows that there is, like, sincerity in Hector. And maybe it's because he's watched far too much Hawaii Five-0. Who knows? But he clearly does actually, in my mind, care for Zoid and for his family as people. He might be willing to press him. He might be willing to, do as he's told. But he cares on some weird, demented level.
Yeah. On a side note, for some reason, whenever I read the scenes between Hector and Zoid, I just imagine them as Joaquin Phoenix and Benicio del Toro. It's
like the Inherent Vice characters.
It's Doc and Sancho. Like I can't not. I know they're not the same character. I just like that's the image I have in my head is those two talking back and forth.
Yeah, that's pretty good. The audiobook guy does do a very funny narration of Hector. He does like a Ricardo Montalban thing.
Oh, good.
which does lend an air of ridiculousness to these scenes where he comes back up. But I agree with you, Will. And I also think it's interesting that like the cop or like government worker who is sort of buys into the myth of like America or does genuinely care or genuinely believes they're doing a good thing is present in like a lot of Pynchon's work. I think is interesting. There is obviously some similarities between this character and Bigfoot. They're certainly, have a similar relationship to the protagonist or the proposed protagonist of their respective novels. But they do both seem to genuinely care about what they're doing. And it does strike me reading through that dialogue between the two of them when he comes to set Zoid up with the checks and, make sure that he's going to be all right, even though he's basically on lifetime parole. That he sort of makes it known that like, I don't agree with this. Like, this is not a good thing. So I'm going to do what I can to get you out of it as much as I can anyway. It's just interesting that that's such a recurrent thing in a lot of Pynchon's work.
Yeah.
So I kind of have an interpretation of this
Okay.
section, and I would like to run it by all of you. So I'm just going to read what Zoid tells Hector. Christ, Hector, croaking, shaking his head. Only Shorty I ever knew lives out in Hemet now, and since his Vietnam days has taken 0 chances. Won't even fly on the airplane no more. Not too promising for you outside of a little Darvon he cops off his old lady. He ain't even good for a class 3 B, far as I know. And, Hector plays it off like, yep, that's some key information. I don't think it feasibly could be any useful information.
Maybe Hector's just an idiot.
Well, no,
Yeah.
I don't think he is. I think this is Hector doing the letter of his orders.
Mm-hmm.
He is saying, all right, I got information out of you. You are now, I can now stamp you as an informant and get on with this, and I don't have to deal with this shit anymore.
Very wink, wink, nod, nod.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That was certainly the impression that I got too. That he was like, just give me, like you're saying, the dictionary definition of information.
Yeah.
And then I'll set you up in a place where you'll be okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I think he differs from Bigfoot.
True. Yeah, Bigfoot would not do that for Tom.
No, no.
I see Bigfoot a lot as kind of like Brock Fawn's soul in Hector's kind of character.
Oh,
I could see that.
Yeah,
like there's a struggle between one and the other trying to take over, and
and it's he's just like at his core, to jump way ahead to Inherent Vice for all the people who haven't read it. I see him as kind of at his core fascist, not necessarily he's not a bad guy. He just like at his deepest core hates the idea of anybody not following the script that he believes in.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Hector doesn't seem like that.
Yeah, almost as if the man he thinks he is or thinks he wants to be is Brock, but he's not capable of being that kind of man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. That's good. So after that, we get the decision to go to Vineland between Zoid and his mother-in-law. Their relationship is so interesting because it really is. It's clear that his mother-in-law does not like him, but is still willing to go to great lengths to help him and his daughter, most likely just because of his daughter. But in this chapter, it really almost feels as though she feels somewhat beholden to help him, given that it's her daughter who ran away and sort of caused this blow up of everything. their relationship has been one that I've really paid close attention to over the past couple of chapters to see how it evolves, and it's an interesting thing that Pynchon's doing there in the kind of background.
Yeah, I don't think Sasha like actively hates Zoid. I think
Mhm.
she kind of puts it on that she does, but I think deep down, like like you were saying, a lot of it comes down to the fact that Prairie's involved. But I think she kind of sees in Zoid a little bit of who she was, but Zoid is just kind of a more exaggerated version of it. A later, she came from a time where she was fighting for what she believed in and fighting for the unions and all that, and it was taken a lot more seriously. And I think she sees Zoid and his kind of continuing on that fight, but there's a I guess like a lack of seriousness that he has. The 60s counterculture had a lot of humor and absurdness and weirdness involved in it. And I think she's kind of taking umbrage to that. Like, I worked my ass off to put you all in a situation where you could keep fighting this fight, and you're kind of doing it, but at the same time, a lot of you just can't get out of your own way and aren't taking this seriously, and it's failing because of that. And she sees that. And I
Mhm.
think that is what drives a lot of her kind of resentment towards him. Is it's not just him specifically, but what he represents, which is that
Yeah.
overall shift in the culture and of the people who are fighting and continuing her push for what she wants and what she believes in.
It's a good point. I also think most of the time when she insults him, it includes the word hippie, if not all the
Yeah,
time. Like
almost all the time.
all the pejoratives include that. So it is almost like she's just attacking his ideology rather than him as a person.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I agree. I think that at this point she hates him. I get the sense that she really does hate Zoid, and maybe it's just
Mhm.
because she's viewing him as like an archetype of the younger generation throwing it all away. And I think that part of what I like about this chapter is that I get the sense that by the end of this chapter, as Zoid is coming into his own as a father, that
Mhm.
Sasha is also seeing that happen. And that's kind of what's happening when she says, like, I just defrosted a pizza. For some reason, that's just how I read it.
That makes sense too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely see that. So they mount up to go out and move down towards Vineland, which is described as sort of this refuge for all of the itinerant hippies who don't know where to go now that the government has sort of come in and busted up everything down along the beaches in the southern part of the state. Does anyone want to read the quote out there that of her going through the sort of description of Vineland as a place? I thought it was pretty cool.
What page is it on?
That's a good
Where are you?
question.
Yeah, I'm
How's
just
the
curious
hiding
where you're
part?
starting from.
I think it's 305. Seems like a lot of folks are heading that way lately.
Seems like a lot of folks are heading that way lately. Zoid nodded. Well, once a year we still all get together up there, cook out, play poker, carry on, all the Traverses and Beckers, my parents and their relatives. It used to be the high point of Fernessi's year, but she stopped coming after high school. There'd be worse places for you in the old bundle to live, have a home, beautiful country, only a short spin up or down 101 from everything, from the 2 Street honky tonks to the eateries of Arcata to the surfing at Shelter Cove, and you'd have a social life because lately this mass migration of freaks you spoke of, nothing personal, from LA North is spilling over into Vineland. So you'd have free babysitting too, dope connections, and an inexhaustible guitar player pool. Sounds groovy for sure, but the only jobs are fishing and lumbering, right? And I'm a piano player. You might have to live by your wits then. It goes on for a while there. There's some really
It
good
does,
descriptions
yeah.
of that area.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing that she's doing because she is pitching it as a place for people that like him that we know she doesn't really care for like to live, but
Yeah.
she's basically creating this paradise for him.
She's giving him the real estate pitch. A community of like-minded people.
Dope connections, no endless spots of guitar players. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So they do decide to undergo that, and they drive out to Vineland. They go through San Francisco, and they run into Mucho Mas, here's where our connection to Crying of Lot 49 shows up. What do we think about his inclusion in the book here? Because I know it's usually much like the Godzilla section, one of the biggest things that people always talk about, the fact that he shows up.
I really like his character in this book. He does seem a little bit more fleshed out and he's more entertaining in this book than he was in the Crying of Lot 49. Um, he also, I think we talked about this when we were going over the Crying of Lot 49, but he does serve a bigger purpose in this book than he does in that book.
Oh yeah.
And he does, I think, like just like last week, he does kind of serve to portray the depiction of the music industry as like a circus or something like. Um, yeah, and I mean it does. Will's kind of gone over Pynchon's views on drugs and stuff, and it does seem like Lucho is supposed to kind of show the dark side of cocaine use and the dark side of drug use, which is interesting. I mean, we've already been over how the 80s were a pretty coke-fueled decade, and it is interesting that a music executive in that decade would be, um, so desperate to quit cocaine that he signed some legal contracts related to not doing cocaine. Um, I do kind of like. I mean, it's kind of a glow up to use the modern term for Mucho. You know,
Yeah.
So true.
he's not. He's kind of a forlorn fuck up in the Crime Block 49, and in this in this book he's he's a record executive with women hanging all over him, and he's very popular. He's people know him, random people on the street know him and stuff.
He has
Yeah,
personas.
he does. True. Yeah, I love the Count Dracula thing, because it's obviously a reference to Count Chocula, but I love
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
whole section.
Do you have any thoughts on his inclusion in the novel, Will?
So I think he's kind of funny because
Mm-hmm.
well, yes, on that level, but also I think it's an interesting inclusion because it's kind of the isolated, massive discursive section of this chapter. The rest of the book, with the exception of like the first two chapters, have been as everywhere, as tangential, as splintered and fragmented as anything in Mason and Dixon or Gravity's Rainbow, really. But here we have it isolated to just kind of a punchline. Like, hey, I've been setting this up as like commentary on the 80s. And you know how I set up that that thing with the record executives being hired from the streets, just literally children who do a bunch of acid knowing that they're the consumers? Well, here's who that is now. And along the way we get a lot of like interesting commentary on like the nature of commitments and the choice to assume a role that you don't care about and how that can still have an effect on you. But it's in a lot of ways it's kind of like Pynchon. A horrible analogy, but it's the only one that's coming to mind, is Pynchon being a surgeon paring away the extent of a tumor, but leaving like the cancerous mole in place.
Just cutting the growth of the tumor out, just leaving
Yeah.
the tumor there.
Leaving Mucho right here. He's just there. There's a deep, horrible root of like crazy shit to dig into, but all around it is healthy skin. Just this normal, catch up on things that you probably could assume about Brain. Come on, what's his name? Zoid.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point. I love his inclusion in this novel. I think it's really interesting too that Pynchon basically makes a reference to Lot 49 right when he introduces him and saying that what he went through, like what was a surprisingly amicable divorce.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because obviously if you've read both books, you know who the other side of that divorce was. And so just him making that little nod, and it just makes you wonder, like, I wonder what did happen to Oedipa after that book ended. Where is she? What happened? At least she found out how to get out of that marriage that she was very clearly not happy in.
Yeah.
And at the same time, though, I don't know. This is probably just complete, like, pothead paranoia. But there was a part of me that when I read that line was like, maybe she's dead. Like, maybe Tristero killed her, and that was why the divorce was so easy. But that being aside, my crazy paranoia. Yeah, I think it sets up all of the stuff with Reagan really well. Obviously, a big section of why he's in this chapter is for the conversation they have at the record label during the production sessions on their album that they're recording. But I like especially what you said, Will, about him representing kind of the crazy record executives that they got off the street but grown up into an adult, because that definitely does describe the whole Count Drugula section pretty well.
Yeah.
Did you have any thought? Oh, go ahead, Will.
I was just going to follow up what you said about Law 49. Luke, you said back when we were covering that book about how kind of, I think it was you, how that the end of that is kind of Oedipa being done with the marriage, just kind of coming to the realization that this is it. I'm done with you, Mucho. And it is interesting to have just that complete void of discussion of her in this book, because she did her growing up in those horrible nights wandering San Francisco.
Yeah, she did. Yep.
Mucho had to go through like a weird cocaine blood contract to grow up. And he's still chasing tail, to use the term of the day.
Yeah, his friend.
Yeah, his live-in friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cody, what did you think about it?
Secretary, or what was? I had the impression that she was a secretary.
No, she just referred to herself as a. Let me find it. It was pretty. Hi, I'm Trillium. She whispered, head to one side. Mucho's friend, and that's just what she leaves it at.
Oh, okay.
It definitely gives off the vibe of a secretary that he's sleeping with, and that was how she became his secretary. So
I mean, she's got his Rolodex pretty well memorized.
Yeah,
she does a lot of like. It seems like she does a lot of secretarial type of work for him. So yeah, I like the inclusion of Mucho. It's one of those things. Again, going back to the difficulty of writing certain characters in certain ways, this is an opportunity for, it could have been really bad and felt really shoehorned and not worked at all. But I think Mucho's inclusion in here, it does feel right. And for all the reasons that you all have already kind of laid out. And especially my favorite part, I think, of this entire chapter is the conversation that him and Zoid have, where they're kind of discussing the transition from Nixon to Reagan and what that means for everything. And there's such a somber resentment that he has, and like he knows what's coming, and to have that weight and know that this is all coming down the pipeline and there's nothing any of us can do to stop it except sit and watch it happen and watch it destroy everything that we've done. That's gotta really suck. So I really, I did like his inclusion here. I think that it could have been off-putting if it wasn't handled right. But I think it was handled very well, and I don't think it would have felt the same if it wasn't someone that we were already kind of familiar with as a reader. But you don't have to be familiar with if you haven't read Lot 40.
True. I think knowing where Zoid used to be and kind of where he is at the end of that book, when Oedipa walks out and they have their sort of last conversation by the van, and just sort of his strange rambling about drugs, to see him show up again now here, in his natch phase, I believe is the exact word, is interesting. And it is also interesting that he switched from psychedelics to a harder drug, quote unquote, which again did happen to a lot of those people in real life.
Yep. And
it got so out of control for him that he had to go see Dr. Hugo Schlapnick, which is a name that I have such a hard time saying without laughing.
I forgot that name. Splanchnik.
Lynchnik.
God.
It just sounds like the most upstate New York dentist name or doctor name that I've heard at any point in my life.
I do gotta love working out of a suite of dust-free upper rooms in
Upper
Sherman
rooms.
Oaks.
yeah. You never know what they'll try to snort. Yeah, that to see how it bottomed him out so hard that he's gone down this pathway is interesting. Do we have any thoughts on Splanchnik and the whole absurd cocaine rehabilitation contract that he signs?
I loved it. It was hilarious.
It was so funny. Yeah.
I really like it's almost like a joke. It's like the anti-joke of symbolism, of literary symbolism,
Mhm.
in the having the treatment for the pain be Novocaine.
Yeah.
Because, like, yes, Novocaine, for everyone who doesn't know, is derived from cocaine. But it has like no similar effects except for numbing.
Oh.
It's one of those things where you can sit around and think about, okay, what does that have to do with the earlier discussion of, like, the DMT in weed, or the real life example of crack being diluted cocaine. But no, there's nothing there. It's literally just Novocaine is an anesthetic, but it's there for your brain to grab onto if you want. Fool reader.
I do also just love the idea that he essentially starts coercing people into signing the contract. Just the way that he goes, oh, you don't want to sign? Let me show you my room of horrors in order to convince you that this is the best idea possible.
The cross section through the jazz musician's skull.
Yeah. All his wet specimens that he has
Oh,
stored
God.
away. He's such an insane character that shows up for 2 pages. But I love it so much.
Yeah, this is a really good moment where you're reminded that the advice for new writers is not the same advice for experienced writers. Because show, don't tell. No, don't show us this. This is horrible. Leave it at an abscessed sinus, please. Don't show it. Don't describe that. We don't need that. That's not necessary. That's horrible.
Yeah, that's so true. I don't need to see that. Nor do I need to see the ear from Mason and Dixon.
Yeah.
I think he does kind of show us the ear.
He does though, which is sad. Maybe if his one regret of Vineland was that he didn't show us all the specimens.
we got the nose scene in V. I don't think he felt the need to do it again.
That's
Yeah.
fair. That's fair.
This scene made me this is where I have to think that a lot of and I know actually that a lot of the writers on The Simpsons were big fans of his, because this reads like
It's very
Simpsons
sitcom-y.
joke from like early 90s, like after the book was published, obviously, but like there was specifically, I'm thinking of, there was a scene in the episode where Lisa has to get braces where she's hesitant to do so, and the dentist pulls out the big book of British smiles as an effort to coerce her into doing it. So yeah, I know for sure, like, these guys definitely have read his work, and this kind of humor makes me like really fully glom onto that.
Yeah, so true. Something happened with him and doctors.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what it is, but man, is it all over the place in his work.
I don't blame him. I don't like him either.
Fair.
I was thinking about the well, I guess rhetorical question proper, but what does Pynchon's fear of doctors have to do with this, or hatred of doctors? And I was thinking about the possibility, the very real possibility, that everyone reading his books, basically, not everyone obviously, but a lot of people reading these books are like, well, this guy's clearly like educated in anti-psychiatry and stuff. When it was like, the Anti-Oedipus came out in 1972, and it was like, oh my gosh, Gravity's Rainbow is on the same ideas. It's so smart. Thomas Pynchon knows so much about philosophy, and it's just, what if it all boils down to the fact that he just doesn't like that people told him to get braces. And that's all it
Yeah.
is. And
Yeah.
it's just that. And he hasn't done any of the connecting of the ideas. He doesn't have any thoughts about the consent stuff pre this book. He's just doesn't like dentists and doesn't like any other doctors as a result of it.
I almost hope that that's the case. Oh my lord. So progressing forward in Mucho's timeline to catch us up to their meeting with Zoid, what did the Count Drugula, the different personas that he had, what did we think about this? I think it's interesting because it recalled the psychiatrist who had different faces that did different things. Dr. Hilarious. Yeah. Not that there necessarily is a direct connection there, but it was something that occurred to me after I'd read through it. But yeah, him adopting these different personas and just sort of going around in a van spreading LSD out on the streets. That's of high quality.
Yeah, I just enjoyed it. It was a funny image to see him in the Count Drugula persona.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, like, I've heard of similar stuff happening. Like, I had a friend go to a concert in Austin, and apparently someone at that concert was just handing out magic mushrooms to the crowd. I don't know if they
That
were.
sounds about right.
I don't think that they were like associated with a music label, but it is something that people do at concerts and stuff.
Oh yeah, the last time I saw Primus, a guy came up to me and said, "Do you want a hit of acid? It costs a hug."
Sounds about right.
What it brought to mind for me was Bobby Boris Pickett and the Monster Mash.
Oh my god. Well, that song's gonna be stuck in my head all week.
Look what you've done to Cody. You're welcome.
It's already in there, god damn it.
Oh my god.
But yeah, between Bobby Boris Pickett and the Grateful Dead,
Mm-hmm.
This is a very believable scene.
Very true, especially the call out of Purple Owsley as in particular that's been made. Oh man, just everywhere in San Francisco. There's so much LSD. They're just delivering it in vans. So yeah, that sort of really does take us into the fact that they were once connected through the music business, and that he was representing them for the label Indolent Records, which is a great name for a fictional record label. And
especially when founded on acid.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. And we get to this interesting scene while they were recording, and Hector's also there for some reason, which I love. And just it leaves halfway through, but it's this interesting scene between the two of them in which they really talk about, like, specifically the death of this countercultural movement and the fact that it is also happening in the music. We get another reference to, eventually the lyrics of music being controlled, and that rock and roll is getting diluted down into something different, that it was co-opted, and now they're coming for the drugs. And the first portion of this is kind of this talk between the two of them about how the LSD revealed to them that they would never die, and that was the big fear of the government, that they had figured this out and that they wouldn't be able to get them to kind of forget that, and now they're going to, is sort of the first half of this conversation before the Nixon and Reagan stuff. Do we have any thoughts on the first half of this kind of discussion between them?
I do just love the whole thing of Hector showing up to the recording sessions and interjecting himself. I talked about this thing from the Crime Law 49 episodes, where I've been friends with some bands and giving them feedback on their live performances and different stuff. And it is kind of it can be interesting to see the creative process at work, and that kind of stuff is a little bit more, like when you're at a recording studio, you're at a concert, or somebody's asking you for feedback. You can watch it happen in real time sometimes, as opposed to like giving writing feedback or different types of feedback. I just really, and it wouldn't surprise me, honestly, if somebody, at least one band, had somebody on parole or on probation, and their PO came around and was trying to interject themselves. I do think it's also could be a metaphor for, like, kind of the man, like, capital M, interjecting itself into rock and roll, and trying to kind of normalize
Yeah.
it and straighten it out.
Or the
Mhm.
label even, just to boil it
Yeah.
even further down.
It is just really funny to me to picture like a DEA agent sitting in a recording studio being like, "No, don't say that. Say this instead."
That's
Well,
so true.
it brings to mind kind of the inversion of the conspiracy theories about like in the 90s, the government sat down with record labels and they created gangster rap. Kind of the inversion of that whole dynamic.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
I don't see anything wrong with that assertion whatsoever.
Gotta destroy black neighborhoods
Mhm.
through music.
Yeah. No, drugs don't work. People don't like drugs.
Nope, crack is not effective.
but they do like music. So then that brings us to the second half, which is this perfectly sort of descriptive narrative conclusion to the kind of rise of Reagan that's sort of hung in the background a lot of these flashbacks. So we get this sort of dialogue about what the world is going to look like if Reagan gets his way, or if this transfer of power between Nixon and Reagan is truly going to bring about an end to everything. And I think it's another case of, there's been a couple of different moments over this book where sort of, Pynchon has gotten into what Reagan represents or what Nixon represented or what the kind of alternate version of the United States these figures wanted to build were. This is just another example of that, of just so clearly forecasting of what the future was going to look like once this man came into power. Did we have any additional thoughts or anything we wanted to talk through about this half of their conversation?
I love it. I think this is a pivotal
Yeah.
part of the story itself, and it's kind of one of the major themes of the book, really kind of being distilled down to its absolute essences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely.
It's a half a page of conversation between them, and it just really perfectly encapsulates everything that's going to happen over the next 20 years in the time frame of the story.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting the way that they're talking in the story in the mid 70s, I think. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And then the book's written in the late 80s, maybe 90 at the very latest. And it's in the air very much was the music police thing. And it's
Yeah.
also kept to the least conversation, really. And I wonder if y'all have any thoughts about the way that music police thing has kind of faded away, or if you think it hasn't in the past 30 years since this book came out.
I don't necessarily think it hasn't gone away entirely. I think it's certainly, I think the people in charge of it, the people spearheading all of it, your Tipper Gores and the PMRC and all of them, I think they got to a point where they realized that they weren't going to win that fight, that there was really no way to get what they wanted. And I think they shifted from that into trying to find other mediums which they found distasteful and that they could distract from whatever issues. It shifted over to video games eventually, where, video games are too violent, so we need to take those away and slap ratings on those. And then it was TV, and then it was, they just keep kind of moving the dial a little bit more and a little bit more. And it really, at the end of the day, I don't think their end game is to enforce fully whatever it is that they're trying to enforce. I think it's more of a distractionary element of just like, if we can get people focusing on this, then they're not going to worry about, all the crazy shit that we're doing. So while I do think that ultimately they would certainly love to have a world in which there's no profanity in music and there's no nudity on film, I think it's just more a weapon to, say, hey, look at this, look how bad this is. Don't worry about, we're taking away, whatever little bits of money come your way still and giving it to these ultra rich people, or we're making these laws that are specifically targeting minority groups. Like, don't worry about that. Look at there's naked people on TV and we need that to stop. There's bad words in music and we need that to stop.
Skinamax needs to go the way of the dodo. Well, I mean, and that's something that is certainly true even to this day. I mean, nowadays it's just all culture war garbage.
Yeah,
but
that's it. They've shifted the dial again. Yeah.
Yeah, that idea of creating, a distraction to pull the viewer's attention away from what's really going on is a very tried and true method. I think that as it relates specifically to music, lyrics, and that whole thing, I think that has gone away because ultimately nowadays you really cannot control access to media the way that you used to be able to. You could just put a parental warning sticker on an album and that would be enough to keep parents from not letting their kids buy that record. And so it was effective for the time, but now if you want to listen to the explicit version of a song, you can just go to Spotify, you can just go to, you can just go to Last.fm, you can just go to Apple Music or Tidal or like, there's just no way to really control that anymore. And even if you want to say like, well, record labels can't sign artists that have, explicit lyrics. Well, then there's also SoundCloud and Bandcamp where you have independent, recording and uploading. And even if those websites were to get locked down, you can still have someone just create like a Substack that they upload audio files to. So like from a standpoint of, being able to actually control that in the way that they could have back in those Tipper Gore days, I think it's gone away just because it's not really a feasible thing.
So you don't think that Mucho's prescription here as a cure bears out? You don't think that the solution is total asceticism?
I don't think so. I mean, there was a time in my life where I flirted with asceticism, but I would personally say I don't see the value in that. Anything else about Mucho before I ask a question about San Francisco?
I don't have any other questions. I do want to read that little section, the conversation that they have. So it starts on page 313. Mucho blinked sympathetically, a little sadly. I guess it's over. We're on into a new world now. It's the Nixon years, and then it'll be the Reagan years. Oh, Reagan? No way he'll ever make president. Just please go careful, Zoid, because soon they're going to be coming after everything, not just drugs, but beer, cigarettes, sugar, salt, fat, you name it. Anything that could remotely please any of your senses, because they need to control all that, and they will. Fat police, perfume police, tube police, music police, good healthy shit police. Best to renounce everything now, get a head start. Well, I still wish it was back then when you were the Count. Remember how the acid was? Remember that window pane down in Laguna that time? God, I knew then. I knew. They had a look. Me too. That you were never going to die. Ha. No wonder the state panicked. How are they supposed to control a population that knows it'll never die? When that was always their last big chip, when they thought they'd had the power of life and death, but acid gave us the x-ray vision to see through that one. So of course they had to take it away from us. That whole conversation is so good.
It is. And it's interesting to see how some of that stuff has changed over the years, because obviously like the government has tried to control a lot of things over its many different iterations, but they're trying to ban menthol cigarettes to take something out of that list there. But we have also seen the exact opposite in that instead of controlling, the fat police, as he puts it, they found ways to use terrible, industrially farmed food to actually like affect people in the opposite direction, that perhaps it would be a better thing to actually make people fat rather than keep them from getting fat. It is an interesting thing where all of those sort of elements of what Mucho was saying back in the 90s were forecasts, but maybe just in one direction or the other as far as what actually ended up happening, especially from that conservative, Christian right that we've talked about over the past couple of episodes.
Well, that brings me to a question, I guess. Does this... So, okay, back in The Crying of Lot 49, Mucho can be very reasonably read as kind of an icon of being wrong. Like, not everything he does is wrong. He's not an evil person, although some people would claim him to be.
He's maybe evil through neglect.
Yeah, it's one of the... he's abdicating any kind of responsibility and therefore does horrible things.
Yeah.
But, it's one of the... he's not right in almost anything he does or says. How are we what is the type of irony we should be approaching this conversation with? Is this two people who are onto something? Is this two people who are just bullshitting, just talking about the good old days, just indulging in their favorite delusion? Or is there something that we're supposed to take as like a sincere expression of the author's beliefs?
It's a good question. I think that's one of those cases where we'll sometimes find one of these portions where the answer could be one or many of those things that you mentioned, and that it really is part of this being a postmodern piece of literature, and that there is not necessarily one right thing to take out of that. Because I think you can read it as, yeah, Mucho's kind of a paragon of being wrong and really doesn't accomplish much, at least from the Lot 49 impression, but is in this case seemingly either rehabilitated or more intelligent or just better off, and is instead looking back on that time where he was more of an idiot fondly. Like, that could literally just be nostalgic, memory. But I think there's enough truth in what he's saying that it isn't that he's completely wrong or completely off base or still, that crazy. I think you can come away with it with a couple of different interpretations or thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense.
So we get this section where they leave San Francisco to head out towards, sort of finally arriving in Vineland. And this quote about the Golden Gate Bridge and San Francisco kind of as an entity is one that comes up a lot when you do see this book getting discussed, either on like the Reddit or back when the discussion post for this chapter was made, when the Reddit did their group read through. And obviously you also called it out in your opening sort of statements, Luke. What did we think about this quote? What San Francisco maybe represents, or what Pynchon is getting at with it? If someone wants to read the Golden Gate Bridge portion.
Sure, I can. Crossing the Golden Gate Bridge represents a transition in the metaphysics of the region, there to be felt even by travelers unwary as Zoid. When the bus full of northbound hippies first caught sight of it, just at sundown as the fog was pouring in, the towers and cables ascending into pale gold otherworldly billows, you heard a lot of wow and beautiful, though Zoid only found it beautiful in the way a firearm is, because of the bad dream unreleased inside it, in this case the brute simplicity of height, the finality of what swept below relentlessly out to sea. They rose into the strange gold smothering visibility down to half a car length. Prairie standing up on the seat gazing out the window, headin' for nothing but trees, fish, and fog, slick from here on in, sniffling, till your mama comes home, he wanted to say, but didn't. She looked around him with a wide smile. This.
Yeah, so what do we think about that description of the bridge and kind of that transitionary point?
I've been on the Golden Gate Bridge just one time a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. Um, it is an interesting experience to do it. It does kind of feel like you're going through a portal or something, which might be somewhat an aspect of what Pynchon is getting at. I do think I think they're heading north out of San Francisco, which I do think um, Northern California, because I think San Francisco is kind of in the middle of California on the coastline.
Yeah.
I think it's still called Northern California. Um, I have no direct experience with what's north of California, the northern part of California, north of San Francisco. But just picking up stuff from reading, stuff like Vineland and other stuff. It does seem to be more of a mixture of conservative and liberal and more kind of redneck and rural and hillbilly. Um, Maybe granola might be another way to phrase that, crunchy or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do think, I mean, it's a transition from rural or from urban to rural. I think I'm not 100% on the exact boundaries of what city is where in San Francisco. But I do think
Mhm.
it's kind of that the Golden Gate Bridge is, you're transitioning from from the city into a more kind of pastoral landscape. San Francisco in general during this time period, the Haight-Ashbury. So I think we're back in, or I guess we're back in the 60s, I think. Yeah. So the Haight, or
Yeah.
maybe the early 70s. Yeah, the Haight-Ashbury thing would have been a big deal back then. San Francisco is a big cultural kind of nexus for the hippie movement. Um, so you might be kind of moving away from a hippie dominated area into a more kind of mixed bag of different kinds of people.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
That was sort
Yes.
of the way that I took it, was that it was a kind of transition from the California that is most widely known, that like Southern California sort of surfer hippie, Hollywood system understanding of the state, to a completely different thing. Different people, different politics, different landscape. Like there's a lot of like ranching that goes on in Northern California, specifically with like sheep and other livestock animals like that. And it's very different politically. Like it is a very different. It was almost a very different state, but the whole state kind of gets pilloried into an understanding that it's just LA, similar to like Illinois and Chicago.
Yeah. No, I think that's what it is. I think it's San Francisco at the time, in this, well, at least in the 60s, was kind of the, like Luke said, like the nexus of the counterculture movement. That's where a lot of the organizations started or headquartered, or and a lot of people went down there. You had a lot of bands that came out of that area. So I think it's just kind of that departure away from all of that you're kind of getting out of that bubble at that point. That's the last outer edges of that life that Zoid was leaving, and that bridge is kind of the disconnection point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't help but be reminded of, in again Crying of Law 49, the depictions of both LA and San Francisco as these kind of nexuses of these mechanisms of control, being the economy and the land development, and the way that this section kind of unites the divide of like historical Northern California versus Southern California, because nowadays it's all sorts of mixed up. We're 30 years on from this book, let alone pre 60s, when San Francisco was it's Atlantic City of the West Coast, and north of there it was nothing but like weird farmers and stuff, and so it was like all conservative in terms of simple binaries. And whereas south of there it's like, oh, that's where all the rich liberals are, and
Mm-hmm.
now is when everything's getting stirred up. I think it's yeah, it's a really lovely way to combine those images.
Yeah, most definitely.
This is kind of an aside, but we do get a reference to Charles Manson in this chapter, and I do think it's important. It's kind
Oh
of
yeah.
historically and different stuff that the Manson family was technically started in San Francisco. Um, yeah, and that the Manson stuff comes up. I'm preparing myself to talk probably too much about Manson and the Inherent Vice episodes that will be upcoming in however long. So
You're doing your research now.
yeah.
Perfect. What do we think about the interaction with Zoid's car and Van Meter and the person who looks exactly
Oh my
like
God.
Zoid? That's looking right back at Zoid as the text italicizes.
Oh, that was a good scene.
It was like something out of Twin Peaks.
I was gonna say it reminded me of the scene in Firewalk with Me,
Yeah,
where
with the
Leland
armless
and
man.
Laura, yeah, and it's so creepy but absurd at the same time. Yeah, that's exactly what it reminded me of.
Yeah, exactly. It's here too. I do love the description of his car, his 64 Dodge Dart, unmistakably his own short, with the LSD paint job, Dayglow hubcaps with the eyes on them, nude with streamlined tits, hood ornament, and at the wheel a standard issue hippie freak who looked just like him. Like, just,
Ooh.
yeah. It's such a... I would love to see what that car looks like with an LSD paint job.
Yeah. It probably would look like one of those thermal paint things that I see every now and then, where the color shifts depending on light and heat.
That would make sense. The fact that you went out and got a custom hood ornament is absurd.
Sorry,
Yeah.
wait a second. You see cars with those paint jobs, Cody?
Have you not seen those thermal paint things?
Yeah, it's a
Certain-
real thing nowadays.
It's-
No, I know it's a real thing, but in your neck of the woods,
Yeah.
what's
San
the
Antonio
point?
has a weird there's a weird car I don't want to call it a cult, but there's a pretty decent like car community, like customization community. So yeah, we see some weird choices for cars down here.
Interesting.
San Antonio is just kind of weird in general. I feel like
It's a real it's a real melting pot of a lot of different kind of people.
Sure. Here we just it's all metal flake. All metal flake. So nothing too modern here.
Yeah, nothing too modern in Wisconsin either.
Y'all
Not
should come to San
gonna-
Antonio and catch all the wild ass, especially the people that don't strap down stuff in the back of their trucks, but they'll have their friends back there just hanging out, holding on to it.
Perfect.
That's yeah,
That's the ideal way to haul
That's-
something.
it's the only way to do it.
So then we get kind of our description of Vineland, so to speak, after they make their way there. And this comes from page 316, where it says, "A harbor of refuge," as the 1851 survey map called it, "to vessels that may have suffered on their way north from the strong headwinds that prevail along this coast from May to October. Vineland Bay, at the mouth of Seventh River, was protected from the sea and its many unsolved mysteries by two spits, Thumb and Old Thumb, and an island out in the bay called False Thumb. The spits were joined by a bridge, as was the inner of the two, Old Thumb, with the city of Vineland, which curved the length of the harbor's shoreline, both spans being graceful examples of the concrete Art Deco bridges built all over the Northwest by the WPA during the Great Depression. Zoid, who was driving, came at last up at a long forest-lined grade and cresting saw the trees fold away. As there below swung dizzily into view came Vineland. All the geometry of the bay neutrally filtered under pre-storm clouds, the crystalline openwork arcs of the pale bridges, a tall power plant stack whose plume blew straight north, meaning rain on the way, a jet in the sky ascending from Vineland International south of town, Corps of Engineers marina with salmon boats, power cruisers, and day sailors all docked together, and spilling uphill from the shoreline a couple of square miles crowded with wood Victorian houses, Quonset sheds, post-war prefab ranch, and split-level units, little trailer parks, lumber baron fluidity, New Deal earnestness, and the Federal Building, jaggedly faceted, obsidian black, standing apart inside a vast parking lot whose fences were topped with concertina wire. "Don't know. Just landed one night," Van Meter said. "Sitting there in the morning when everybody woke up, folks seemed to be getting used to it." I love that description of Vineland because it goes from this kind of like beautiful, idyllic, almost like Norman Rockwell kind of painting in its description to, and then there's just this ugly Federal Building that showed overnight right in the middle.
Dropped out of the sky.
The real
Yeah.
monolith has arrived.
Exactly. The center of re-education has arrived to Vineland. Yeah, it's a great description of the city and kind of helps underpin the overall kind of vibe that you pick up from the earlier chapters when Zoid's going about doing his sort of daily chores.
Mhm.
It you can see why it would have been like a nice place for him to take his kid and raise her, and why, you know, Fernessi had such a good time when she was a child there. It seems like just kind of a wholesome place to raise your family.
Well, and I think that's representative of the kind of promise that a lot of people were made at that time of, you know,
Mhm.
especially with the incoming real estate boom. You know, this is the great place to raise your family, and the white picket fence and the whole leave it to beaver kind of life. And that's the, you know, again to make the tie back to Lynch and like Blue Velvet, like that's all and fine on the surface, but that certainly isn't what was actually, you know, eventually lurking under the surface there. It was, you know, the setup for a lot of empty promises and destroyed dreams that were not too far down the road.
Right. And you're really seeing, you know, Pynchon illustrate the way that the hippies turned into the baby boomers as far as how we would
Mhm.
define them now. Just this sense that, like, you know, Zoid is this countercultural figure who's just played in bands, and his, you know, mother-in-law just goes, "Yeah, why don't you go up to Vineland and just buy a house?" Like
Yeah.
that's just pitched as this very normal thing for him to do, which is not the case for people anymore. And a lot of that is because all of that land, all those houses were bought up by all these, ex-hippies and people who turned into the baby boomer generation, who hold most of the land and most of the wealth in this country still to this day. It's interesting because in his description of sort of Zoid's Odyssey up there, you kind of, when you think about, what the baby boomer American dream is, right? It isn't what the hippies were talking about. It is that white picket fence. It is that blue velvet opening, montage. It's what Vineland is depicted as.
Yep.
So it's interesting that he so expertly weaves that into the narrative here.
Yeah, and even more so because, like, of all the people to illustrate that, Zoid is like the least of the problematic elements of that transition within the generation.
Mm-hmm.
Because he really is still through the mid 80s still carrying a torch for the movement.
Yeah.
He's still
Yeah.
a true believer. Just because I moved here doesn't mean I don't still believe what I said I believe. And that conflict of identity that all
Yep.
people deal with at some level, and the depths of it with this generation.
Yeah, so true. The way you impersonated that was almost like a person explaining that they moved to the suburbs not because they were afraid of crime, but because they just liked the neighborhood better.
Well, they had two friends living nearby.
Yeah.
The house was really cheap. They're but yeah, no, it's very normal, and not just in the sense of like, oh, it happened to the baby boomers, but also just people. Everybody compromises with their beliefs, and in this way, Pynchon's kind of showing the way that the natural compromise for these people completely destroyed their dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It's amazing stuff. Is there anything else we want to mention about Vineland? We get a lot of sort of like touring through Vineland sections. Like there's the next section, I want to say 2 pages after the quote I just read, where you kind of get a sense of like what the downtown is like, and then eventually, of course, we get to see like where his house is at, and kind of just some more community stuff. Is there anything else we want to bring up or talk about within all of that?
Well, do any of you see a purpose to the inclusion of Desmond's origin? Is that his name, Desmond?
The dog?
Yeah.
Do I see a purpose in it?
Well, just I mean, it's there, and I think it's a sweet little moment to see, where Zoid got him. But I'm not sure. It feels very important just because of how important Desmond is to the first chapter, and then it's just like, well, yeah, that's what he is.
I guess maybe it could have been expanded on a little bit. It made, if you're gonna have it there, maybe give us a little bit more to kind of drive home the importance or the connection there.
I could just generally use more about Desmond in this book.
More dogs everywhere.
Just giving a whole chapter of Desmond.
Just write Isle of Dogs, but make it a book. Yeah, I can't say that I came away with anything specific in relation to Desmond.
Yeah, no, I'm only asking because when I was reading through this again, I was just thinking, I really like this. Why do I like this? No reason, I guess. There's nothing here.
I think it does, potentially solidify that Pynchon is actually a dog person.
That's been a mystery until here.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people would assume he's a cat person. But I feel like
maybe it's more esoteric than that. Maybe he's like a ferret guy.
Oh, I could see that. Or I could see him having a tortoise.
Or a tortoise. I had a tortoise. I had 2 tortoises.
What were their names?
One was called Goofy and the other was Speeders.
Good names.
Yeah. My sister and I had them. We had one of them. I
Peter's
don't remember which one it was.
tortoise.
We had for a long time.
They do tend to live a long time.
Uh-huh. They weren't the ones that get like real big. It was just one of the kind of smaller ones, but they were still. A friend of my wife's family, they have one of the big ones, and it's like, I think they tried to pin it down. It's like almost 80.
Dang. You gotta like put that pet in your will.
I know. Yeah, no.
All right. Anything else for this chapter before we move into funny parts?
I did like the brief kind of descriptions of Zoid's life once he kind of settles in.
Mm-hmm.
Just like his going about the town, and then do we want to talk about the mention of the Thanatoids that comes in at the end of the chapter?
Oh, just that he's up there doing the work on their living complexes.
Yeah, well, I mean, just the fact that that's
Yeah.
what they like. They've been kind of relocated into these kind of housing developments where, you know, I think again, if you're looking at this at them as displaced Vietnam vets, or not even just Vietnam, just any like war vets, like
Victims of government.
That's yeah, it's, you know, just resettle them, get them out of the way, and we don't have to worry about them. I think that kind of says a lot about the way that these people, you know, of all the people I thought I would have this conversation with, it was weird. I was talking to my grandma yesterday. We went up and visited her, and I don't remember how it came up. We were talking about I think she was asking it, somehow in the conversation it came up like the reason that we have so many wars. And this is, you know, my grandpa was in the Korean War. My uncle was in the Navy. So I've got people in my family from the military, but she was like, she got real somber for a little bit, and she was like, you know, why do we have all these wars? Like we're sending all these boys off, and then they either don't come home or they come home and they're like, they just can't function anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah, I don't have an answer to that. It sucks. And I think, you know, it got me thinking about this section with the Thanatoids, and like they're sold on this promise of, especially around this time where, you know, they've kind of shifted this idea of the military and tried to glorify, you know, like we talked about earlier with I think it was Sasha's dad. You know, that whole like, I just want to go out and kill people. Well, hey, you can do that here.
Yeah.
You know, they sold these people on this, you know, idea of either being a hero or you know, going out and you just get to kill whoever you want, and then they come back absolutely fucked up, and most of them just don't get cared for. You know, they end up on the streets, or they end up in these housing developments where they're just like not really living a life. They're just existing and going day to day in a sort of haze. And it's sad that they got put into that situation after everything that they gave up.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, it just gets back to the fact that, like, I don't remember what episode it was that we were talking about it, but how this book sort of analyzes the human cost of a lot of these things that the government does.
Yeah.
And its effect on people as human beings. I mean, the whole thing you're talking about really reminds me of the conversation in Inherent Vice between Doc and Coy, where he's trying to make the allusion to, you know, your government or your country is strung out on smack, except instead of smack, it's sending off people to die in jungles for reasons they can't understand.
Yep.
Yeah, which is very accurate to how this country did its business through most of the late 1900s and into the present day.
Yep.
So, clarifying question: is this actually the first time in the book that there's been the direct link between the Thanatoids and Vietnam vets? Because we've been talking about it this whole time, having read the book before, but has it actually been directly pointed out by the narrator before here?
I feel like it came up at one point in one of the earlier chapters.
It's
where
in the Blood and Vado section, they're talking about how a lot of the Thanatoids seem to have had lingering trauma from being over in the war.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It's like heavily implied, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, it's not explicitly stated. It's, yeah, like Luke said, it's heavily implied.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it seems to be not exclusive to that, but their population certainly increased as a result of Vietnam, I guess is the easiest way to put it.
That I think is explicitly stated somewhere, that the Thanatoid population really exploded after the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
It is cool.
Very, very cool, very chill, very fun.
You know what else is cool? Funny stuff.
Yeah.
Did we have any funny? That was my attempt at a segue. Go ahead, Luke.
My funniest part is it's really fun to picture the bag of weed as the monolith from 2001.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like like the music whenever they see the monolith, like
And when they
Right.
touch it and
Zoid
then,
walks, yeah, Zoid walks in and then like it's like bang or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah,
I do
Yeah.
love that.
I think the whole young Kissinger concept is probably
Woody
my
Allen as young
favorite one
Kissinger.
because he does look like a young Henry Kissinger. Like,
Especially with the glasses. Yeah.
And just imagining that performance of Woody Allen as young Kissinger really, really killed me.
Oh my God. Yeah. Like,
very, very disturbing.
I thought the scene where Hector was describing KQAS was pretty hilarious, like his hyper specificity.
Yeah.
I'll read the section here. It's on it starts on page 312. Oh, that's okay. Hector putting on his face goofy and dangerous look as of some old-time poncho flying high on reefer, a preferred intimidation technique that extended to his suit, which he'd had semi-retailored to suggest the zoot of the 1940s. But let me tell you, because sometimes I hear records on your label when I'm out, cruising. So I really want to tell you, man, about my car radio. He moved closer to Mucha, who'd already read and filed Hector's story by now, and would presently begin to edge away, which is kind of unique because it only gets this one station, KQAS, kick-ass 460 on the AM dial. I got their decal on my car window. You can look at it later if you want. I got their t-shirt too, but I'm not wearing it today. It's too bad. It's got a good picture on it. It's what it is. It's this close-up of a foot and an ass, like a freeze frame, right where the foot is just making that first contact with the ass, right?
So, yeah, who's on the cocaine in this scene?
Well, I love the way Cody read it. It sounded more like a 5-year-old who comes to you to tell you a story and just...
That's exactly how I read it.
Yeah.
And just getting closer and closer and closer.
Yeah, like just inching slowly towards, like, Oh my God.
I got this t-shirt, but I'm not wearing it now. It's really good, though.
That
out the ass with his
especially...
fingers.
Or just the detail that has their sticker on his car. Oh my God. I think I may need you to just cut you reading that quote out and send it to me in the final edit in case I ever need to laugh, because that was an amazing performance of...
Thank you. I'll add that to our collection
that
of
quote.
snippets that we've saved.
Yeah. Oh my God. Any other funny moments that anyone wants to bring up?
So I really like a ways earlier in the chapter when Zoid is staying with Van Meter's commune, and he decides that he's just had enough. In the morning, gonging with insomniac beer and tobacco headache, Zoid stumbled to the residence of the commune elder and gave notice. "How's that?" cupping an ear as an F4 phantom came screaming invisible in the swamp haze. "Said that we're gonna be..." The rest was swallowed in a fugue of B-52s. "F4 Phantom, I think!" screaming through megaphone hands. "Well, thanks, gotta be going," Zoid mouthed without wasting his voice, smiled, waved, tipped his hat, and was off hitchhiking with his baby and their effects inside the quarter hour. It's a great comical scene to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh man, so true. So that brings us into quotes. My quote comes from page 317. In this whole sort of long description of Vineland as a city, it says, "Someday this would all be part of a Eureka Crescent City Vineland megalopolis, but for now, the primary seacoast, forest, riverbanks, and bay were still not much different from what early visitors and Spanish and Russian ships had been. Along with noting the size and fierceness of the salmon, the fog-brown treachery of the coasts, the fishing villages of the Yurok and Tolowa people, log keepers not known for their psychic gifts had remembered to write down, more than once, the sense they had of some invisible boundary, met when approaching from the sea, past the capes of somber evergreen, the stands of redwoods with their perfect trunks and cloudy foliage, too high, too red to be literal trees, carrying therefore another intention, which the Indians might have known about but did not share. They could be seen in photographs beginning at the turn of the century. Villagers watching the photographer at work, often posed in native gear before silvery, blurred vistas, black tips of seamounts emerging from gray sea fringed and brute innocent white breakings, basalt cliffs like castle ruins, the massed and breathing redwoods alive forever, while the light in those pictures could be seen even today on the surface of Vineland. The rainy indifference with which it fell on surfaces, the call to attend to territories of the spirit. For what else could the antique emulsions have been revealing? I love that quote for a lot of reasons. One, it's some amazing nature writing when he gets into the description of like the coastline and the cliffs and all of that in the second half. But also, I think it's so interesting how a lot of the first half is sort of what he spends a lot of Mason and Dixon talking about.
Yeah.
This idea of, the invisible barrier and like the Edenic landscape of the Americas, and the fact that, the relationship between that Eden and its native people is very like sacred and special, and they don't reveal that to everybody. I think it's very interesting how you kind of see that percolating in Pynchon, 7 years before he publishes Mason and Dixon. And obviously, as we've, sort of hypothesized, he was probably writing it for a while, but it's really cool to kind of still see that carried over here, that a lot of what his mother-in-law especially mentions is this idea that like so much of Vineland is still like wilderness that's untapped, and it's perfect to hide in. But she mentions, I don't even think that the government is ever going to be able to come in there and clear cut all that wood out and make it into houses and everything. And that's again getting to this idea of American landscapes as some kind of Eden, as something sacred. And then, of course, what's on the cover of this particular book in most editions, clear cutting of forests. And we hear mentions of different sort of governmental or construction entities going into these forests and trying to hack away. Blood and Vado's like harrowing journey through the woods is only possible for them because they know the territory well. They've lived there for a long time and they know how to traverse it. But bridges are out and there's all these construction crews, stranded because they don't know how to navigate the forest. It shows that kind of continual grinding through of the natural resources that starts with Mason and Dixon and now continues here into the modern age, where they're hitting sort of the last reserves of some of that untapped wilderness. It's an interesting aspect to the book that kind of sits in the background for most of it, and is just kind of there for the reader to be experiencing if they're paying attention to it, but is very easily forgotten about.
Yeah, it's a good section.
Will, what about you? What's your quote?
I've been trying to look for one that I like as much, but I cannot. So I'm going to be lazy and pick the last paragraph of the chapter. After a while, Zoid was allowed into the Traverse Becker annual reunions, as long as he brought Prairie, who at about the age of 3 or 4 got sick one Vineland winter and looked up at him with dull hot eyes, snot crusted on her face, hair in a snarl, and croaked, "Dad, am I ever gonna get better?" pronouncing it like Mr. Spock. And he had his belated moment of welcome to the planet Earth, in which he knew dismayingly that he would have to do anything to keep this dear small life from harm, up to and including Brock Bond, a possibility he wasn't too happy with. But as he watched her then, year by year, among these reunion faces, her own was growing more and more to look like, continuing to feel no least premonitory sign of governmental interest from over the horizon beyond the mental disability checks that arrived faithfully as the moon, he at last began, even out scuffling every day, to relax some, to understand that this had been the place to bring her, and himself after all. That for a few years anyway, he must have chosen right for a change. That time they'd come through the slides and storms to put in here, to harbor in Vineland the good. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just a really beautiful moment that for the listeners who are unaware, the lot of us, all of us hosts here, recently read The Ice Shirt by William T. Volman, and just the choice of bringing up the title of this book at this point, it's it's chosen for a lot of reasons, but the kind of straightforward historical one is, it's a reference to the original name for the New World that the Vikings gave it, and it's just a wonderful choice to actually, bring the whole name into this novel. I think something about reading that book made that paragraph hit me so much harder because of the amount of emotion overlaid that Volman is able to bring to the table for the reader to kind of empathize with the sense of desperation that the Vikings had when they were coming to North America.
Yeah. I feel like if we keep going, all of our listeners will eventually read The Ice Shirt because it's two books in a row now.
Yeah. It's hard to find, I will say, but find a copy and read it. It's very, very.
Luke, what was your quote?
So mine's from the page before Will's. Sasha's cousin Claire, credited in the family with paranormal abilities, quickly enough Redzoid noted the unguttering flame of the torch he carried and started having him over for supper and to look at old family snapshots, telling what she remembered of young Frenessy the explorer and the reports she'd come back with about rivers that weren't supposed to be where she found them, and of the lights on the far banks, and the many voices, hundreds it seemed, not exactly partying, nor exactly belligerent either. Boulders too heavy for anyone but Bigfoot to lift come thudding all around her in the middle of the night, torrents of summer sun steelhead the size of dogs, glowing more than glittering, abandoned logging sites, boilers and stacks and flange gears looming up out of the blackberries, and the strange, lost town of Shade Creek, supposedly evacuated in a flood of long ago, now unaccountably repopulated with villagers who never seemed to sleep. We've kind of gone over like the horror aspects. That section's not this that small section's not really cosmic horror, but it is. If you were to cut it right there, the people that don't sleep, the appearance of Bigfoot and stuff, it does kind of this kind of like pastoral horror aspect to it. I just really like that quote in general.
It's a good one.
It is a good one. I do love that description of Frenessy's like expeditions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I love the specific way that it's almost like this weird trout turns into the machinery. It's a great section.
Absolutely, it is. Cody, you're the last one.
Yeah, I'm gonna switch gears. I had a different one picked, but after we've gone through the chapter, I've changed mine. I was gonna go with the crossing the Golden Gate Bridge, but I think we already talked about it, and that's also pretty easy. But this is actually just right after it, right before the sort of chapter half break that takes place in here on page 315. Trees. Zoid must have dozed off. He woke to rain coming down in sheets, the smell of redwood trees in the rain through the open bus windows, tunnels of unbelievably tall, straight red trees whose tops could not be seen pressing into either side. Prairie had been watching them all the time and in a very quiet voice talking to them as they passed one by one. It seemed now and then as if she were responding to something she was hearing, and in rather a matter-of-fact tone of voice for a baby too, as if this were a return for her to a world behind the world she had known all along. The storm lashed the night. Dead trees on slow log trucks reared up in the high beams, shaggy and glistening. The highway was interrupted by flooding creeks and minor slides that often obliged the bus to creep around inches from the edge of totality. Aisle-mates struck up conversations. Joints appeared and were lit. Guitars came down from overhead racks and harmonicas out of fringe bags. And soon there was a concert that went on all night, a retrospective of the times they'd come through more or less as a generation. The singing of rock and roll, folk, Motown, 50s oldies, and at last, for about an hour just before the watery sunrise, one guitar and one harmonica playing the blues. I love this depiction. I think just kind of summarizes that leaving behind, like we were talking about earlier, about leaving that area and that life and that world and that culture, and just kind of slowly getting out of it. Now, what I really like, I think my favorite part of that whole thing is the backwards progression of the music as they leave, going from the modern time, the rock and roll, backwards, kind of like trying to slowly hold on to all these and remember what it is that's being left behind, and just watching it chronologically fade away as they're leaving that area. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. There's something very somber about that scene too. Well, I think that'll bring us to most pinch on part of the chapter. Who wants to go first for that?
My most mentioned part, this is a small one. I mean, it's inconsequential, but it's just the weird digression about the fluorescence on the glasses at the bar.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that was yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of another author. I say this kind of stuff a lot, but I can't think of another author that would have included that.
Do you want to read that out, Luke?
That's a good poll.
What page is it on? Do we remember?
I think it's like
Oh.
319 or something like
Let me
that.
see. I'm going through right now. It's towards the end, yeah.
It's like 2 or 3 pages from the end.
318.
Yeah.
318, yeah.
The indigo ambiance of the fast lane lounge, known for the harmless liquid swabbed routinely onto the rims of the bar glasses, making them glow in the ultraviolet frequencies abroad in this room. Some of it was sure to come off on a drinker's mouth. Men usually wiped it away. Women either allowed it to diffuse through their lipstick, for which the substance had a strange affinity until the entire lip area was aglow, or else avoided all contact by drinking through straws, content to admire the classroom effect as one might admire an angelus halo.
Yeah, such an interesting, just random thing that he has in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Like that just speaks to, I guess, his imagination more than anything else. Just he probably just had that idea. What if there was a bar that just wiped glowing liquid on their cups? I'll just throw that in here.
I feel
Yeah.
like I've heard of something like this. Like
I would
people,
believe it if it existed.
like cracking open the glow tubes, putting it in like cocktails. I feel like I've heard.
It
that for
sounds
some
like
reason.
something that like Tom Haverford would do.
Absolutely, snake
Yeah.
juice with some extra glow oil.
Yep.
That's so true. I can't stand that character.
I think that's the point.
I watched Parks and Rec for the first time and didn't have any issue with him. And then with every subsequent rewatch I did, I've watched that show maybe 3 times. I've just grown to be able to tolerate him less and less whenever he's on
Yeah.
screen.
I think that's exactly what they're going for with this character. And Aziz Ansari is the perfect person to do that.
Yeah, very true. It's almost a meta casting choice. My most pinch on part of the chapter is probably I'm gonna go with the young Kissinger angle again, just because it's not just a funny bit that we glossed over, but also again similar to like the glowing liquid. Where do you come up with that other than maybe Pynchon having that as like a private joke to himself and his friends for a while?
Yeah.
Like what if there was a movie about Kissinger and he was played by Woody Allen and he just ended up putting it into the book? I would say that might be what I'd have to go with.
Yeah, honestly, I take it as proof of the fact that Kissinger had a relatively boring childhood that there isn't a young Kissinger movie.
Yeah, exactly.
I was gonna say for me it was the breakdown of the Nixon to Reagan transition. I'm going to change that now after Luke's comment on his funny part with the monolith of weed. I think that might be my choice at this point. Just Luke described it perfectly. Like when you think about that scene in that movie, if you haven't seen, watch that movie. But just like I'm just watching like the slow approach to it, the reaching out and touching it, like the way the music is building, and oh my god, yeah, it has to be that.
Will, I think it's just you that hasn't given us yours, right?
Yes, comes to me, and I'm going to bring the shortest quote I've ever brought to the table.
Mm-hmm. Jesus wept.
Nope. No. Look. The standard is much larger than a normal sentence, and you know it. My choice for most pension part is the one sentence after Zoid is furious at Hector for daring to ask him to turn on one of his friends in exchange for his receiving bail. A strange trick of the light, no doubt, or else Zoid was inopportunely hallucinating, but the highlights on each of Hector's eyeballs had vanished. The shine faded to matte surfaces that were now absorbing all light that fell on them. It's especially post Against the Day. I've come to see the way that Pynchon uses light's refractivity a lot more in his earlier novels.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's just a really perfect example of how he does use light symbolically. Because, whether you take it as, Hector, hardening himself, or as just Hector feeling downtrodden in a weird way. Like, really? You think I would do this? You think I'm not doing everything I can for you? How dare you? Whether it's personal pain or it's just a cop saying fuck you, the way it's described is really, really unique.
True.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have any listener comments, questions, or anything from Instagram or anything like that, right?
No, we don't.
We could talk about the volume issues, but that would probably be pretty boring.
Do we want, Cody, do you want to include an explainer in the episode for that?
So for anyone listening on Spotify, we have been, if you didn't, I tweeted about this the other day, but if we are aware of some issues where people are saying that Will's volume specifically is very low, that seems to, from what I have been able to tell, that seems to be an issue with Spotify's compression algorithm. They have a very specific volume limit that they place, and if certain audio is below or above that threshold, their compression kicks on, and it can cause issues with that. I handle all the audio production for this, so I am doing what I can to try and correct that. It only seems to be affecting Spotify, and for the time being, until I can actually like re-upload episodes, my understanding is that there's a loudness normalization on Spotify, and that should help. So, I like I said, I will try to go in and re-upload like remastered, remixed Vineland episodes, and hopefully that'll fix it. So apologies if it is something that is impacting you and it makes it kind of a challenge to listen to, but it is something that we are trying to fix. So for the time being, I would say try the loudness normalization, or if you have another means of listening to the show, try it on there, because we've tried it on multiple platforms and haven't seen an issue with it there. It only seems to be with Spotify. So,
and this is a good moment for all of us to say thank you, Cody, for doing this hard work of
absolutely
editing the audio.
Appreciate
We
it.
don't say it enough.
It's been a real learning experience. It's helped me kind of gain some audio engineering skills that I didn't have. So
yeah. No, obviously that's a lot of work. We all appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you.
So that does bring us to the end of our discussion of Chapter 14. As we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we have one chapter left. That's Chapter 15. We are going to be splitting that discussion in two. So you are going to be getting two Chapter 15 episodes from us. It's a 62-page chapter. It's a real monster. So we're gonna take our time with it. But yeah, we'll be back for that next week, and then after that, we'll have our wrap-up episode before being all done with Vineland. As always, thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Where there's only like 3 things on the menu. There's just lattes, Americanos, and like hot coffee and like espresso shots, I guess. And we don't have like any syrups. Like maybe there will be a bottle of vanilla kicking around somewhere. Like we just serve like one milk and like oat milk so that anyone can drink it, I guess. It's cash only with no change. So if you don't pay an exact change, the rest of it just goes into a tip jar. The only thing we have on like our menu is like a grilled cheese, and it's $1. And if you give us more than $1, you get either that equivalent units of grilled cheese or no change. And also the baristas are just able to talk to customers however they want. They can play their own music, And the store kind of has hours, but nothing too solid. It's just sort of whenever the first person gets there.
The last person leaves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And every time I tell this to one of my coworkers, they all just say, yeah, I would work at that, at that coffee shop.
I kind of think I would go to that coffee shop, to be honest.
Yeah, it really sounds like you've invented the future of diners.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
Hey, can I get a grilled cheese? All I have is a 20. Well, you can have 20 of them, or you can have one and give us $19.
Imagine how easy taxes would be to do for that
Oh
store.
my God.
It's all cash only, so there's no record of it
Yeah.
anyway.
You
Yeah.
have like 4 suppliers.
Yeah. It's like the local grocery store literally for slices of cheese, and then like whatever the closest coffee roastery is.
I would go. I think I would end up going to that coffee shop.
See,
Assuming they're open when I get there. I think
right,
that would
yeah, well,
certainly.
I see. I feel like that coffee shop has the possibility of succeeding, but it would need to be in the right place. Like,
Oh, for sure.
yeah, like if
That could-
yeah,
It could work in Austin. That
Yeah,
sitting
yeah.
like that, it could totally work.
one of the cities I literally give as an example to people whenever, because I've had baristas beg me to open this coffee shop. I'm like, with what money? But I'll definitely put you on the list. And whenever they're like, well, yeah, you would probably work here. I'm like, I don't know. I think like Portland, Austin, like
Yeah.
the Minneapolis, like Twin Cities area, probably New York.
Jesus, it does sound like a
Like-
Portlandia sketch.
Yeah, right, exactly. Except
You
Fred
might-
Armisen would be like super arrogant about what kind of coffee beans they have.
Yeah, and it'd have to be some kind of like artisanal cheese that like is
Right.
sourced from some farm 100 miles away.
Yeah.
You might need minimum hours, you know.
Yeah.
Like, you know, just like a 2 or 3 hour slot that somebody's going to be there.
Just
Yeah.
be like, well, I can guarantee you that if you get there by noon and before 3 p.m., we'll be open. It
Someone
may
will be
be as wide ranging tomorrow as 7 to 11, but it just depends on when someone's going to be there.
And it might be the barista who's afraid of flames, so you might not get a grilled cheese,
you might just be able to get coffee.
but it'll be coffee.
It will be coffee.
Now they can make a cheese sandwich if you're okay with it just being 2 pieces of cheese between 2 pieces of bread.
It's really unfortunate that I never really realized until just now that all grilled cheese is a cheese sandwich that's been
It's a warm
toasted.
cheese sandwich. Yeah.
It's really all it is.
It's a cheese sandwich with a fever.
That's pretty good. Cheese sandwich that sounds like a restaurant lingo.
Yeah.
Hey, he's getting a cheese sandwich with a fever. Throw a patty on that, grilled onions, salt, spice.
I love diner lingo. That's some good stuff.
It is some good stuff. Absolutely. Oh, I found that Jaco Pastorius solo record, Portrait of Tracy, that I'd recommend on the show like a couple
Mhm.
weeks ago. My record store here got a copy of it like right after we released that episode.
Really?
I was like, oh hell yeah, now I can go buy that. I've never seen it
Nice.
before. But now he's staring at me from above my record shelf.
Nice. Weather Report was the band. I remember we were trying to figure that out last time.
Right. That's what it is. A band that did not deserve him.
No.
But that he
No.
played faithfully in
He was-
for years.
Yeah, I have to wonder what kept him there, because that I never really could wrap my head around that.
Yeah, because I'm looking through the people who were in it. It was kind of a super group.
Yes, I think Al
But-
Di Meola was in there. I could be wrong. It's been a minute since I even thought about Weather Report.
Peter Erskine was the drummer. Jaco Pastorius replaced
Oh,
Alfonso
shit, they've had a
Johnson.
ton of people in and out of there. Okay.
Yeah.
Steve Gadd. That's a name I haven't heard in a while.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Good old session musicians.
Whatever happened to session musicians? I feel like that's such a thing that
They-
isn't around that much anymore.
I think they are. They just don't get the credit that is due to them. Like people like if you go and look at Josh Freese, that dude has played on everything, and he does not get a lot of credit for it. It's usually drummers, I think, that are the ones that tend to fall into that category. But like I know Freese, and then like Ilan Rubin played for a bunch of different people before he kind of made Nine Inch Nails his permanent thing.
Yo, this list for Josh Freese is insane.
Did you ever hear about the solo album he put out?
No.
Okay, so he's been like a big influence on me ever since I even started playing drums.
Yeah.
And so I kind of always had kept an eye on him. And back in like, let me see if I can find it, because I don't want to do it disservice by not really explaining fully what he did. Okay, yeah, okay. So he did this album called Since 1972. This was 2009, and this was like when the kind of pay what you want thing had just started happening, and so he did a God, let me find the whole list. He took it to an extreme that was absolutely amazing. I may not be able to find it. Anyway, he did this whole like you could buy all these different bonus editions of the album that came with bizarre things, like people who paid $50 got a congratulatory phone call. If you paid $20,000, you would get two songs recorded about you for a certain price. A lot of these were also jokes. Like there was one where if you paid a certain amount, you could ride around with Danny Carey in his car while you do mushrooms, and he plays whatever he wants on the radio. There was one where you get to like hang out with him for a day, which that one I think was legit, and someone actually paid that amount and actually hung out with him. But yeah, it was all these weird, like, bizarre options that you could pay into and get these supposed bonus things. But yeah, he's played on pretty much everything that you can imagine. And now that he's the Foo Fighters drummer, he's got that going for him. So
Yeah, I really feel like I don't like the Foo Fighters, but something in me thought that if you're ever going to end this band, which you probably should at this point,
that would have been the natural point to do
this
it.
would be the time to end this band, this experiment, because it just doesn't feel, even as a non-Foo Fighters fan, it does not feel right to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very strange. And poor Pat Smear, that poor man loses the singer for his first band and then gets put onto Nirvana with the third record and
Loses the singer for that
loses
band.
his singer for that. And then, the drummer from that band hooks him up with a gig playing guitar in his new band, and then their drummer dies. Like, wow. That's just...
Yeah. It's so, and the first two Foo Fighters albums are really good for me. Color and the Shape is like holds a lot of water for me. I think that album, that was one of those right time, right place kind of things for me, and I still absolutely adore that record. Everything after that has been really hit or miss, and more miss than hit as it's gone on.
Mm-hmm.
I respect Grohl as a musician. I like him as a person. He seems like a cool dude. Like, I'm sure he's a fun hang. I just I feel like he could do so much more, and I think he could do more behind the drums than he does as a front man. I'm sure he loves doing Foo Fighters, and that's what it is. I've
never watched somebody turn into a dad more than I have with Dave Grohl, considering where
he's a cool dad, though.
Where he started with, like pretty heavy punk bands, and then Nirvana, and then he did that string of projects before Foo Fighters with, like, he played with Queens of the Stone Age. He did that Probot thing.
Yeah.
Like, he did all of these like heavier things, and then Foo Fighters started, and it was like, pretty good in the beginning when it was just him, and then just slowly as time has gone on, it has evolved into dad rock in proportion to Dave Grohl as a man turning into dad rock.
He's by himself keeping AOR albums to be a thing. And kudos to him, I guess. Like the flip side of that is you're right in that's he's become a dad. But the flip side, if you want to see the former rock music, like I'm gonna put edgy and heavy quotes here, but he played heavier music earlier on.
He did. Yeah.
Art Alexakis is the opposite of that because he's like super Christian dad now, to the point where he's like he will not curse in his songs anymore because it goes against his newfound Christianity. So he's gone the same path but branched off kind of almost opposite direction simultaneously.
Yeah, it's wild.
But I think
I would certainly rather have Dave Grohl as just a dad, as a cool dad, than as a Christian dad.
Oh, for sure.
That would be weird.
I don't want to hang out with Art Alexakis. I like Everclear was never that cool. Like they were.
He's the kind of guy who's gonna have that man cave in his basement that you got invited to. As a Christian dad, that's his like edgy hangout zone where he gets to really express his masculinity.
Except he wouldn't be playing Matchbox 20 and Kid Rock and all that. It would be like Jars of Clay and DC Talk.
Yeah, Switchfoot. Reliant K.
Oh God. My middle school years are flashing before my eyes.
Same.
Christian rock was good.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
are we gonna call it rock?
I think they
call it rock.
It's generous.
Hey, we could listen to Toby Mac, the founder of Christian hip hop.
I mean, if you want to go, like, we can do the Christian punk rock and put on some MXPX.
That's true. We could go Christian classic rock and put on some Petra.
Oh God. There was a. God, it's gonna drive me nuts. I got to figure out his name. I remember I learned this when I worked at Barnes and Noble. There was a Christian rapper, and he tried to make a song that went after Eminem. Which I just remember thinking, like, why? Why are you doing this?
About Insane Clown Posse?
No.
Well, that was a weird thing where after 2 decades of making that music, they came out and they just went, "Hey guys, surprise, it was all about Jesus."
It was all those times we were killing people with hatchets, all for the big J, man.
People don't understand Christian satire. It's very nuanced.
It's a lot of layers to it. KJ52, that's who it was. He
oh man, I haven't heard that name in so long.
He wrote a song called Dear Slim, which
I think I've heard this song.
Let's be honest, like I guarantee this never came up on Eminem's radar, but I kind of wish it had. Like, say what you will about his quality as a musician nowadays and his output and all that. There are still few people who can absolutely destroy someone in a diss track, and he's almost at the top of that pile. I would love to have seen what he could have done with this, but I get why he wouldn't.
Yeah, I absolutely could. Man, there was a Christian screamo band, like
there was a few of them.
Early 2000s screamo called 1,000 Foot Crutch.
Yes,
I remember.
Yes.
Yes, I remember seeing them in concert, and I got dragged along to this concert against my will, basically, and watching them perform the entire time going, "This is for God?" This is what you think in your mind that you're going to come up here and start a mosh pit for Jesus? Like, this is so strange. Why are people listening to this?
There was also a couple of Christian ska bands. I remember Squad 5-0 played here in San Antonio a few times.
Oh, the sconescence in the early 2000s and late 90s was really something.
It really was.
It's wrapping back around. I swear to God, I feel like I hear more and more local
get real big
ska
fish
bands.
back again?
I don't think it'll ever be like a record label pushed thing, but if the amount of local bands that are starting that are ska is any indication, there's a lot of people still interested in that music.
It's a plague, is what it is.
I mean, it had its time, that's for sure, but
It's had too many of its times.
it's yeah.
Okay, the Specials are a good band.
The Specials, yeah, I'll give you that. And like there's a few Real Big Fish songs that I dug, and I'll still listen to every now and then. Sell Out was good. Beer was good. Their cover of Take on Me was pretty damn good.
Mm-hmm.
I simply have decided, in fact, I did decide long ago that I do not like ska baselessly. So that's what this is an expression of the pure human will.
I'm not going to try to
ska.
convert you and tell you like go listen to these bands because they're going to change your life. Like
It's all about the names. There was a local band.
Seems
they
like
did have good names.
They did
I
have
will
good
give them
names. There's this local band named Ethan Frump and the Stockbrokers that did ska music.
God.
And that's just so good.
The guy who hosts 60 Songs That Explain the 90s was in a ska band, and it had a really good name. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I gotta see if I can find it because it was really good. Scantily Plaid, but it was Skantily.
Amazing.
it does seem like about 50% of everyone who played a guitar or any instrument really in the late 90s had a ska band.
Yeah, I mean it was
much, yeah.
like what the punk was to late 70s. Sorry, what punk was to the late 70s was what ska was in the 90s to, former guitarists.
I don't know what's going. I wish I could help. I don't know computers for shit, so
I know a little bit.
you probably know more than me.
Well, haven't used Windows in. I mean, it's actually coming up on a decade.
Are you a Linux
you do
user?
Linux, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ah, I knew it.
Maybe
Yeah,
you should listen to ska then.
Please no.
It might bring some joy into your life.
I listen
Their
to joyous
effervescent
music,
energy
just
might-
not ska.
Are you a fan of the overall vibe of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater?
Hey, now come on, that's a cheap shot.
There was so much ska on that
There
video
really
game.
was. It was an inordinate amount of ska on there, especially on the first one. Second one ramped up the punk. See, that's why. Okay, you're gonna get me going on a tangent now. There was a different skating game on the PlayStation called Thrasher Skate or Die that had a monumentally better soundtrack than Tony Hawk did.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah, no, I'm
Skate
a
and
little
Destroy,
too
that's what it
young
was.
for Tony Hawk Pro Skater.
Well, now they have the
Wait, what
remake
did you
on the
say?
PlayStation.
I'm a little too young for it. It wasn't cool for my generation.
It's been around for like there was
Yeah.
iterations of that forever.
Yeah, and it wasn't cool by the time I came around. Everyone's like older brother played it, and they were like, "Yeah, that's old." We were the generation that just played Call of Duty for some reason.
That was a game I never got.
Simulated warfare is a good time for all.
I mean, I can get down with some good old simulated warfare. That's not good. Like, I mean, not at the point it became popular, it was kind of okay, and then it was very not good. It's incredible how not good it is, even as a game, ignoring any politics of it all.
I just also was never a big fan of first-person shooters. Outside of GoldenEye, and I liked BioShock. So those two.
Will forever be my favorite game series.
Which
Yeah.
one was
Okay.
that,
So I'm looking
sorry?
at the BioShock.
Oh yeah, fair.
I'm looking at the Thrasher Skate and Destroy soundtrack. It's all like golden era hip hop. So it's way better than all the ska stuff that was on Tony Hawk.
Yeah, I like the arcadey first person shooters like Team Fortress and stuff, but
I used to play a lot of Team Fortress 2 when I did play games.
it's one of those things where at a certain point it stops being about the mechanics of the genre and more about, the teamwork aspect.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What characters did you play?
Oh, I was one of those people who was actually like good at pyro.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
I liked the dings, dopamine.
It is a very satisfying sound when you activate that ability.
Kate, have you listened to the Smiles new album?
No, I need to get on that because apparently it's better than the
That's what I
first
heard.
one.
Yeah, my brother-in-law texted me the other day and said it sounded more like them kind of finding their own sound rather than sounding like a Radiohead offshoot.
So here's how I feel about the Smile. I remember when I saw their like announcement performance at that British thing, the one where freaking what's his name? What's the Radiohead guy's name? Not Johnny Greenwood. Tom York. Tom York puts like the bass over his neck, and then he like has this crazy look on his face where he's like, "We're the Smile, not as somebody smiling, ha 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 ha, but as the man who smiles when he lies." And then they just started playing right after that. Like I saw that whole thing and was like really impressed by it.
Yeah.
And then when they released their couple singles, I was also pretty impressed by those two. And then I joined their mailing list, which was set up like a waste mailing system from Pinch On, which I think is interesting. And then when the album came out, I listened to it the first time and I was like, wow, this feels unremarkable. And they did this KEXP live performance where it was the exact opposite of the album, where they did a bunch of live improvisation and still like retained some of the melody and song structure of the stuff off the record, but it was like listening to a completely different band. It was crazy to me. So I was like, well, I guess I'll give this another try because this is an amazing set they did. And I remember being underwhelmed by the record. So I went back and listened to it again, and I could appreciate it more the second time. And I kind of picked up where some of like the traces for what they did live on that KEXP set came in, but I still wasn't super impressed with the album. Like I really loved half of it, and the other half of it, I was like, okay, that's fine.
I remember listening to it and just thinking like, yeah, it's good, but it didn't blow me away. But yeah, I need to sit down with a new one and see.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it though, because pretty much everyone is saying, like you said, like they either found their own sound or like just sort of overall took a step up.
Yeah. I think at this point, I don't bank on getting any more Radiohead records. So
no.
I think this is as close as it's going to get to anything like that.
I feel like a Moon-Shaped Pool is a Radiohead record about the depression of there being no more Radiohead records.
Yeah.
And this group of people who literally were all friends since like grade school and had played music together for basically their entire lives realized that kind of the tank was empty. And that's what that album is, in my opinion.
Well, so for me, when I saw that they had True Love Waits on there, I was like, well, they finally figured it out. So this is probably it.
And Burn the Witch, the same thing happened there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I like some of Tom York's solo material. I rarely love a whole album of his solo material.
I didn't like the first one he put out that much. The Eraser or something like that.
Yeah. That one I don't believe I've listened to. I've listened to his Suspiria soundtrack, and that I really enjoyed. And then I listened to Anima, and I thought, oh, okay. But then, like, he's got a lot of individual singles that I think are really good for just like one or two songs. So his solo record is kind of interesting. But Johnny Greenwood's like scores are some of the consistently the best scores in Hollywood.
I'm
So
curious if he's
he's-
going to do P.T. Anderson's new one. I haven't heard anything about it.
Yeah, I haven't either. I need to go back and rewatch Phantom Thread. I feel like
I really liked it.
yeah.
I think it threw a lot of people for a loop, because it really truly was one of the more different films he's done. I think it was kind of a shift similar to like going from like Boogie Nights and Magnolia to Punch Drunk Love. It was kind of the same shift in tone and style.
Kate, I was going to reply with a picture to your harassment, and I just didn't. So I'm just going to tell you what it was. It was going to be a picture of a pair of scissors saying, "On my way to destroy a business," but just didn't happen. So there you go.
I could not when I pulled into that like outdoor mall and I saw that they had just a dedicated store to Untuck It. I could not believe it. Like I was shocked.
I had no idea what that was until I looked it up.
It's the
That's
only kind of
insane.
shirts that Will wears.
Yep. Yep. I pay extra.
Yeah, I
For
saw
the
it was like
lack of a hem.
$80 for a shirt.
They're very expensive for God knows why.
I have shirts from high school still. Like I don't like buying clothes. I
mean,
don't want to pay $80 for a shirt. It's outrageous.
Those are designer prices.
Mhm.
Like low-end designer, but designer on sale prices.
It's wild.
It's just, think about all of the time you'll be saving ironing. Like I don't know. I don't understand.
Hang up your damn clothes, people.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
Don't leave your laundry unfolded in the basket for 5 to 7 business days.
And if you do, run it for like 5 minutes.
Right. All right. Chapter 14 of Vineland.
You don't want to pivot and become a laundry-based podcast where we tell people good advice for clothes care. Line dry your clothes, everyone.
Fabric softener is a scam.
Today we're gonna be reviewing Tide's new laundry detergent.
I don't like it.
I think this kind of stinks.
New York is exactly the place that podcast would come out of. So obviously we cannot make it.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll move to New York after we move to the Faroe Islands. That'll be the continued evolution of the show's existence.
It'd be inauthentic to do anything but.
I agree.
Speaking of rap songs, did we all listen to Ben Shapiro's Fire verse?
Fuck.
Wait, what?
I thought that was a joke. I saw the picture from that. I thought it was a joke. It's a real thing.
What is
Ben
this?
Ben Shapiro's on the new Tom McDonald single.
No, really?
I know this is me. I'm actually being serious. It's not, the rapping isn't bad. Like it's not bad, but it is Ben Shapiro and he does
Download
rap.
on iTunes. What is it? 2003?
So he actually has like a decent cadence. He's not like stumbling over and getting off time.
Yeah, like it's not bad. I mean, he raps kind of quickly. I hate that I just said that it's true, but it's not terrible rapping.
Well, because that's the reason I ask. Is like a lot of times when I hear people who aren't rappers by nature, by their as their career or anything, like they tend to. It's not something you can just jump into and do. Like so, a lot of times they stumble over the beat or they have a really shitty cadence. I don't want to hear it, but
I'm listening to it right now.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Why?
So
He's wearing a sweatshirt with the Dare logo, except it says facts.
That's the picture I saw. Yeah. What were you saying, Will?
I'm terrified of what you're describing. What is it? What
Oh.
are you talking about?
I'll let Luke tell you because he knows more than I do.
There's
Ben
a
Shapiro,
ERT televisions in the music video with Ben Shapiro's face on it, like Big Brother.
Ben Shapiro does a rap verse on the new Tom McDonald single.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
We're experiencing Kate listening to it in real time.
This is so weird.
I'm gonna get unreasonably upset if I listen to it, so
That's why I can't do it. I nope. I'll wait for Dead End Hip Hop to take a stand on it before
I can't believe I just watched Ben Shapiro rap like that.
wet ass pussy.
That's the thing that confuses me the most is that he like doesn't believe rap is music. Why would he do this?
Because he's an inconsistent asshole, I guess.
Ben, I've never rapped before. Tom, just talk slower. You'll be fine.
In reference to his rap verse, Shapiro tweeted that Bach wasn't respected during his time alive either, and that's why people don't like his rap verse,
That's fucking hilarious.
Wow.
which implies a lot of
you know
stuff.
That it does.
in a weird coincidence, I'm looking at Tom McDonald's Wikipedia page. That KJ52 song we were talking about earlier redirects to this page.
That's crazy.
Man, I can't believe this is real.